DNA didn't lie, but the law almost did. Courtrooms aren't made for emotion, but that day, when the K-9 entered and Lena whispered, "Max?" the air cracked with something you couldn't explain. Axel froze. A German shepherd trained to ignore distractions, to serve, to follow. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. He turned his head. He walked off command. And he rested his head on a little girl's feet. The silence in the courtroom said everything. Except the law didn't deal in feelings. It dealt in facts, in papers, in ownership. But what if science proved the girl was right? What if Axel decorated officer, hero, police asset, was actually her lost childhood dog? This is not just a reunion. It's a story of doubt and discovery, of second chances and impossible hope, and of one child's love that never let go. The morning sun poured through the grand arched windows of Marble Hall, casting golden veins of light onto the stone floor. The courthouse, with its aging limestone walls and towering columns, stood like a relic of another time solemn, quiet, and entirely indifferent to the lives that passed beneath its vaulted ceilings. Dust motes floated in the sunlight like drifting thoughts no one had time to finish. In the center of this stillness, a pair of small shoes tapped softly against the polished floor. 6-year-old Lena Morgan walked beside her mother, her tiny hand enclosed in Grace's firmer, cooler grasp. She held a stuffed dog in her other arm, threadbare from too many hugs. Its once fluffy fur now patchy and dulled with time. Its name was Pip, though only Lena still remembered. Pip had been her bedtime protector for 3 years straight since the night her real dog, Max, disappeared. Grace glanced down at her daughter, adjusting the little girl's coat. "You're being so brave today," she whispered, voice gentle but lined with tension. They were here to support a friend from their apartment complex, Mrs. Langford, who had found herself at the center of a heated dispute with a neighbor over property damage. Nothing dangerous, nothing frightening, just one of those adult arguments that required courtrooms and long waits and paperwork. Lena didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, not from fear but from curiosity, taking in every detail of this strange, echoing place. The dark wood benches gleamed like river stones under the overhead lights. The carpet, though faded, held elegant patterns that looped like vines. There was something important happening in the air, though no one said it aloud. She clutched Pip a little tighter. As they walked through the hall, passing tall double doors that led into chambers, Lena noticed how grown-ups moved differently here. They didn't look at each other, they whispered. Their steps were fast but careful, as if afraid to disturb something fragile in the air. Even Grace's voice had shifted. It had that guarded, clipped tone she used when speaking to doctors or strangers on the phone. Lena's boots squeaked slightly as they neared courtroom 12. A woman with a clipboard checked their names, gestured politely, and opened the door. Grace nodded her thanks, guiding Lena inside. A faint scent of paper and old books hung in the air, mixed with coffee and something colder, metallic, like worry. It was a typical courtroom, rows of benches for observers, a raised platform for the judge, lawyers arranging files, typing on laptops, whispering to one another like chess players mid-match. Yet Lena was uninterested in the proceedings. Her eyes were elsewhere, drawn not by the stern faces or the flags or the seal of justice carved into the wall. Number. Her gaze caught something else, something alive. In the front corner, near the judge's bench, sat a German shepherd, his form solid and still like a bronze statue. He wore a black vest that read "Polished Dog" in white embroidery. His ears were alert, facing forward. His dark eyes scanned the room with patient precision. Next to him, a police officer stood quietly tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind face and calm presence. He held the leash loosely, but it was clear the dog didn't need pulling. The two moved as one. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Something inside her twisted, a feeling not of fear, but recognition. The kind that strikes just before a memory surfaces. Her heartbeat quickened, her steps faltered. "Mom," she whispered, tugging gently. Grace followed her daughter's gaze, her brow furrowing. "It's just a police dog, sweetheart. Come on, we'll sit in the back." She gave Lena's hand another pull, steering her toward an empty bench. But Lena kept looking. Her lips parted slightly. Pip dangled, forgotten at her side. The dog hadn't moved, yet Lena felt the weight of his eyes. deep brown, rich like wet bark. He didn't blink, didn't tilt his head, but there was a flicker something in the way he watched her. Familiar, gentle, curious. As they sat, Lena turned her body, eyes still locked on the dog. She felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, and something stranger. Possibility. She reached down and touched her coat pocket. Inside was a cold, worn piece of metal, a relic of a time before the old dog tag. It had been Max's, hanging from his red collar with the little silver bell. She never let Grace throw it away, never forgot how it felt. She'd almost stopped believing it mattered. Now it felt warm in her palm. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with small talk and procedure. The clerk checked documents. Lawyers clicked pens. People settled in. It was just another Thursday in municipal court. But to Lena, something sacred was unraveling in the quiet spaces between breaths. She didn't know how yet, didn't know why, only that this courthouse, this dog, and this morning weren't ordinary. They were connected to something lost, and maybe, just maybe, about to be found. The murmurs in the courtroom faded into a low hum as Lena settled beside her mother, but her eyes never left the figure in the front corner. The German Shepherd, statuesque in his stillness, remained perched near the judge's bench, his black vest with the white lettering Paulus dog catching the light every few seconds as he shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. He was beautiful in a quiet, powerful way. His coat was thick and clean, the brown on his flanks edged with deep charcoal streaks. His ears stayed upright, alert to every movement in the room. Yet it wasn't his stature or uniform that held Lena in place. It was his eyes, deep, dark, and still, but not empty. They shimmered like two polished stones, and when they turned toward her, not fast, not sharp, but slow and deliberate, Lena felt something jolt deep inside her chest. Recognition. It came without warning, without reason, but it was there. A tremble she couldn't name. She had seen those eyes before in dreams, in memories blurred by time. In the ache of a name she still whispered some nights into her pillow. Max. Her fingers twitched around the worn ear of Pip, her stuffed dog. She leaned forward slightly. Her mother's voice pulled her back. Lena, sweetheart. Sit. Still. But she didn't respond. Couldn't. The courtroom around her dissolved into shadows. The wood panels, the rows of grown-ups, the ticking clock on the wall, they blurred into the backdrop of a single moment she couldn't look away from. The officer beside the dog noticed her gaze. He was a tall man in his early 30s, with a calmness in the way he stood, like someone used to danger, but not defined by it. His name tag read Brooks, and his hand rested gently on the leash wrapped around his wrist. He followed the line of the dog's stare, and his eyes landed on Lena. He smiled, not the kind of smile adults use with children to shoo them away, but something softer, like he understood she saw more than most. Lena stood up. Grace reached out instinctively. Lena, what are you doing? She whispered, her voice just sharp enough to signal warning. Stay by me. But the child didn't hear her. Not fully. Something invisible tugged at her, not forceful, not loud, but steady, like a tide pulling her toward the shore of something lost. She took one step forward, then another. The courtroom had not yet come to order. People were still filing in. The chatter hadn't quite died down, and so no one noticed the small girl leaving her bench, walking slowly down the aisle between pews of distracted adults. No one, except Officer Brooks and the dog. The German Shepherd's head tilted, just slightly. His ears twitched, and though he didn't move from his place, his posture changed. He leaned forward just a hair, like a ghost of a wag trembled in his spine. Lena stopped a few feet away. Her eyes, wide and steady, never left his. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just stared, like she was trying to remember something important, a scent, a sound, a moment that had slipped behind the curtain of childhood but refused to vanish completely. The dog blinked once, and then he exhaled a soft, steady breath that made his chest rise and fall visibly for the first time. He leaned down slowly, nose close to the floor, then raised his head again, as if sniffing the air between them. His gaze didn't waver. Officer Brooks crouched next to him, noticing the shift. "You know her, boy?" he whispered, almost amused. But there was something in the shepherd's body language, not excitement, not alertness, but something quieter, like recognition laced with caution, like reunion wrapped in disbelief. Lena took another step closer. Her mother's voice followed behind her, hushed but strained. "Lena, please come sit. Don't bother the officer." Still, she didn't move back. She lowered her gaze briefly, then reached into her pocket. Her small hand emerged, clenched, fingers wrapped around something metal. She didn't open her palm yet. She just held it, thumb running along its edge, as if drawing strength from its weight. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In fact, it was barely a whisper. But to the dog, it might as well have been thunder. "Hi," she said softly, eyes still locked onto his. "It's me, M." The shepherd's ears twitched again. His front paw shifted slightly. Officer Brooks straightened, sensing something change in the air. "Easy," he murmured. Lena looked at the dog, then down at the tag in her palm. She took one more step forward, now just 6 feet away. Then, quietly, she said the words that hadn't been spoken in years, words that once echoed through backyards and living rooms, spoken through giggles and puppy fur. "Sit pretty." The room didn't hear it, but the dog did. And before anyone could say anything, before Brooks could pull the leash, before Grace could rise from the bench, before order could be called, the dog sat. Not like a working dog, not like a soldier responding to command. He tilted his head slightly, raised his front paws just enough, and settled into a posture that was almost playful. Not regulation, not trained, not police, but familiar. Lena's eyes flooded with tears, though they didn't fall. And Officer Brooks stared, stunned, unsure, and suddenly aware that this day, this courtroom, and this dog were not going to follow protocol. "Who's the little one?" a man's voice said lightly, cutting through the murmurs that still rippled through the courtroom. It belonged to Mr. Calhoun, a defense attorney in a gray suit, 2 shades, too smug. He leaned slightly over the railing that separated the legal area from the public seating. His tone was casual, dismissive, the kind adults often use when they forget children are listening. "Cute kid. Likes dogs, huh?" Lena didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the dog still sitting in that soft, peculiar posture. Front paws delicately raised, ears now perked but relaxed. The courtroom hadn't noticed yet. Most people were still finding seats, opening notepads, whispering about schedules. But Officer Brooks was watching, closely. Lena's voice was quiet, not much louder than a breath, but it was clear, and it carried further than anyone expected. "That's my dog." The words hit like a stone dropped into still water. Grace's head turned sharply. "Lena!" Officer Brooks blinked. His grip on the leash loosened instinctively. The shepherd beside him didn't move, didn't bark, but something in his chest shifted, a tension unraveling in his shoulders, as if a familiar scent had broken through the blur of duty and training. Mr. Calhoun chuckled uncomfortably. "Your dog, huh? You mean the K9 unit? That one?" He pointed lazily to the vest on the shepherd. "Paulus dog." Lena didn't smile, didn't back away. She reached slowly into her pocket, her small fingers closing around the cool metal piece she'd carried for 3 long years. Not because anyone told her to, but because she couldn't bear to leave it behind. Not when there was still a sliver of hope. The tag was scratched, dull around the edges. The lettering faded. It had once hung from a red nylon collar that jingled every time Max ran through the backyard. That collar had been torn the night he vanished. This tag was all she had left. She stepped forward and held it out, her hand trembling only slightly. "I kept it," she said softly. "After he was taken, his name was Max. We got him when I was 3. The dog's ears flicked. His gaze followed the movement of the tag like it was a compass needle. Grace stood quickly now, voice low and urgent. "Lena, come back here, please." But something unspoken filled the space between Lena and the dog, something more powerful than orders or protocol. It wasn't just memory, it was recognition. The kind that doesn't need proof. The kind that happens in the marrow of your bones. Officer Brooks took a slow breath. "Sweetheart," he said gently. "This dog's name is Axel. He's been with the department for 2 years. Lena looked up at him. Her expression wasn't defiant. It was solemn, almost too old for her small face. "I know what he's called now, but I know who he is." Brooks hesitated. She turned back to the dog, holding the tag between them like a key to a door no one else could see. Then, barely above a whisper, she said it again. "Sit pretty." The German Shepherd shifted immediately. Not like before, not like training, not like obedience, but like something deeper had been stirred awake. He straightened his front legs and raised both paws delicately, even clumsily, in a posture so specific, so personal, that Grace gasped aloud. Because that wasn't standard. That wasn't K-9 protocol. That was Max. And everyone who saw it knew. A hush fell over the courtroom. Mr. Calhoun cleared his throat awkwardly and stepped back. The bailiff glanced at the judge, who hadn't yet entered. A few early reporters paused their scribbles. A woman in the third row muttered, "Oh my God." The dog, now fully upright, looked at Lena with eyes that no longer belonged to a stranger. Officer Brooks dropped to one knee beside him, stunned. "I've never seen him do that." Lena took one more step. Then, gently, she crouched down, just out of reach. Her voice trembled, now not from fear, but the fragile edge of a miracle unfolding too fast. "You used to do that for me," she whispered. "Every time I came home from school." In. The dog wagged his tail once, slowly, then again. Lena smiled, barely. The kind of smile that hurts because it's tied to something you thought was gone forever. "Max," she said, almost to herself. The German Shepherd let out a quiet whine, not loud, not frantic, just a soft, rising sound that felt like a name remembered. Officer Brooks looked up at Grace, who was frozen by the bench, hand over her mouth. "Ma'am," he said slowly, voice edged with something raw. "You said he was taken during a break-in?" Grace nodded, tears beginning to well. 3 years ago. We searched for months. We reported it. We thought he was gone." Lena reached forward, hand hovering near the dog's fur. "He wasn't gone," she said. "He was just lost." The bailiff finally moved, stepping toward the front. "Should I alert the judge?" Officer Brooks rose. "Yes, and maybe someone from the department." His voice shook. Lena sat back down, cross-legged on the floor. The dog eased forward, unprompted, and rested his head in her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in 3 years, the child didn't cry into her stuffed dog. Because Max had come home, in the most impossible place of all, a courtroom made of silence, echoes, and second chances. For a moment, silence ruled the room, not the kind of silence born from order, but from something far more ancient, the kind that falls when something impossible happens, and no one quite knows how to breathe through it. The courtroom, moments earlier buzzing with routine anticipation, now stood still, frozen in a collective pause. All eyes had shifted from legal pads and cell phones to the image at the front of the room. A small girl crouched on the floor, her arms gently wrapped around the neck of a fully trained police K-9, whose massive frame had folded calmly into her lap like it was the safest place on earth. The same dog who moments ago had been all muscle, discipline, and government protocol now looked like a child's best friend finding his way home. Then the sound came, a single gasp, sharp and audible. It rippled through the room like a match struck in dry brush. Another. Then another. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "That's not a standard command. I've worked with K-9S 20 years. They don't do that for strangers." Officer Brooks didn't move. He couldn't. One knee was still bent from where he'd crouched next to Axel. No. Max and his eyes stayed fixed on the dog's face. It was like watching a switch get flipped in slow motion. Axel had always been reliable, sharp, obedient, controlled, a model K-9 officer. But he had never melted like this, never leaned into a human like that, never offered his heart without asking permission. Now, he lay pressed against this little girl, as if drawn by memory itself. Brooks swallowed hard. Something inside him, something buried beneath layers of training, logic, and skepticism began to stir. This wasn't standard. This wasn't routine. This was real. From the judge's bench, the door creaked open, and Judge Eleanor Finch, a woman known for her stern voice and strict clock, entered with a stack of files tucked under her arm. She took 2 steps toward the bench, paused, and caught sight of the scene. Her steps stopped. Brows drew together. She scanned the courtroom, trying to understand the tension humming beneath the surface. "Is there a disruption?" she asked, voice echoing slightly. Officer Brooks stood, unsure whether to answer or salute. "Your Honor, something unexpected has occurred." Finch stepped up to her bench but didn't sit. "Unexpected? How?" Grace rose from the second row, her hands trembling slightly. "My daughter," she said quietly, "believes that the dog, your police K9, is her lost pet. He was taken during a home invasion 3 years ago." Murmurose again. Finch raised one hand, commanding silence with a single motion. Then she turned her gaze back toward Lena, still crouched on the floor with Max's head resting contentedly in her lap. "And the dog?" she asked. "How has he responded?" Brooks cleared his throat. "He responded to her command. A command I've never taught him. He performed a behavior that's not in our standard training protocol, at least not in any I've used." The judge narrowed her eyes. "You're telling me a trained K9, currently active, has broken protocol in response to a civilian child and appears emotionally attached?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you believe her?" Brooks hesitated. He looked at the child, then at the dog, and when his voice came, it was slower, less certain, and somehow more human. "I think something's happening here that I don't understand, but I believe the dog knows her." Gasps again, this time quieter, a ripple of emotion rather than surprise. Finch stepped down from her bench. She rarely moved from that space. It was a known thing among lawyers in this district, but now she crossed slowly toward the girl, heels clicking softly on the wood. She stopped a few feet away. Lena looked up. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were calm. "Young lady," the judge said gently, "what's his name?" The child didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Max." "And you're certain?" Lena nodded. "He used to sleep at the foot of my bed. He chewed the corner of my purple blanket. He liked apple slices, not carrots. I taught him to sit pretty because it made my mom laugh." Finch turned slightly, her lips pressing into a firm line. She was a woman of rules, of evidence, of reason. But even she wasn't immune to the thing now hanging in the room, the overwhelming weight of something deeply true finally being spoken aloud. She turned to the clerk. "Pause proceedings. Call for a recess. I want both families and Officer Brooks in a private chamber." The gavel fell, echoing like thunder against the hush. Grace reached for Lena, but the girl didn't rise, not yet. She stayed beside Max a moment longer, fingers brushing through the fur on his neck like she was tracing her way back home one silent breath at a time. Brooks reached out, hesitant, touched the dog's harness. "Come on, Axel," he said, almost out of habit. The dog didn't move. Lena rose gently, placing one small hand on his chest. "Max," she whispered, "it's okay." Then, and only then, the dog stood. Not at command, but in response. To her. The private chamber was smaller than expected. No grand woodwork or echoes of justice, just beige walls, a faint hum from the overhead vent, and a long oak table that had seen decades of secrets. But in that moment, it felt like the room where truth was waiting to be heard. Lena sat quietly between her mother and the judge, her legs too short to touch the ground. She clutched the frayed dog tag between her fingers, the one she'd kept all these years, like a prayer pressed into metal. Across from her, Officer Brooks stood with Axelno. He corrected himself internally. Max sat his side. The dog sat alert, but relaxed, his ears flicking now and then toward the girl. Every few seconds, his eyes would drift to her, and his tail would tap the floor soft, rhythmic, undeniable. "You said he was taken during a burglary?" Judge Finch asked gently. Lena nodded, voice trembling like the memory was coated in frost. She was still trying to thaw. "I was 3, she whispered. "It was the night before my birthday. Mommy had just finished making a cake. I was asleep. Then I heard glass break." Grace closed her eyes, jaw tightening, but she didn't speak. The pain in her posture said enough. Lena continued. "Max barked. Loud. Louder than I'd ever heard. Then he ran out of my room. I hid under the bed." She swallowed hard. "I never saw him again." A beat of silence passed. No one dared interrupt. "We searched Grace finally added, her voice rough with unshed years. Every shelter, every station. There was no sign of him. No chip tracked, no leads. It was like he vanished. Judge Finch glanced toward Officer Brooks. "And how did Axel come into your department's possession?" Brooks cleared his throat, fingers brushing along the worn patch on the dog's harness. "He was picked up outside city limits, wandering along the edge of a highway. Animal control brought him in. No collar, no readable chip, just a high prey drive and uncanny responsiveness to voice cues. Our K9 unit was short-staffed. He passed every test." Lena looked up. Did he still remember anything? Brooks met her gaze, something shifting behind his eyes. He never bonded the way K9s are trained to. He obeyed, sure, but there was always a hesitation, like part of him was elsewhere. He turned to the dog now, crouching slightly beside him. Max leaned into him, but when Lena exhaled just a breath, the dog turned toward her instantly. The room noticed. Grace did. The judge did. Even the clerk, silent in the corner, dropped his pen. There was something in the way Max looked at her, not just attention, but recognition, as if her very breath had a scent he'd memorized in another life. Brooks spoke again, slower now. "I've handled 3 K9s in my career. All of them loyal. All of them trained from scratch. But this one? He came pre-bonded to someone I hadn't met yet." He looked at Lena. "I think today I met her." The air thickened not with tension, but with the weight of what everyone silently understood. Max hadn't just been adopted into service. He had been taken from something he never stopped waiting for. Judge Finch tapped her pen, eyes distant. "It's a remarkable coincidence," she murmured. "It's not a coincidence," Lena said softly. Her voice was steady now, like something inside her had found ground to stand on. "I used to sing to him. I had a song. Want me to show you?" Before anyone could answer, she cleared her throat and hummed. A small tune, off-key in the way only children can be, but full of truth. It wasn't a melody for strangers. It was the kind sung beneath blanket forts and whispered in flashlight-lit nights. As the notes floated across the room, Max's ears perked. He whined, and then, without being called, he crawled across the floor, slowly, carefully, as if afraid the song might stop if he moved too fast. He rested his head in Lena's lap again. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. Brooks looked down, hands shaking ever so slightly. Max closed his eyes, tail sweeping once across the floor. The judge exhaled, long and slow. "This isn't something that can be decided with a gavel," she finally said, "but it demands investigation." Brooks straightened. "DNA testing on the dog. Review of animal control records. I'll cooperate fully." Grace nodded. "We kept his puppy fur in a box, for memory's sake." Lena smiled faintly, running her hand through Max's thick coat. "He always came when I hummed." For the first time in years, the room wasn't filled with bureaucracy or authority or roles. It was just a girl, a dog, and a past trying to return home. The courtroom had never been quieter. The judge had allowed a brief recess, but no one left the room, not the bailiff, not the spectators from the earlier case, not even the opposing counsels from the property dispute hearing. They all stayed, because something was happening here, something no one could quite explain. Officer Brooks stood a few feet from the center aisle, one hand loosely holding Axel's leash. The dog no longer just Axel, but maybe Max sat upright beside him, ears perked, tail twitching with anticipation. Across from him, Lena stood on the low platform, usually meant for witnesses. She looked smaller than ever, but somehow steadier. Like the gravity in the room had shifted, and now she was its center. "Are you sure?" Brooks asked gently. Lena gave the smallest nod. "These aren't training words," she said, her fingers wrapped around the old dog tag like it still had power. "They're just our words." Grace looked on, breath held. The judge gave a subtle motion with her hand. "Go ahead." Brooks knelt beside the dog and unclipped the leash. Axel Max stayed perfectly still. "Okay," Lena whispered, taking a breath. "Let's see if you remember. Is this spot?" She stepped forward and crouched slightly, just as she used to in their backyard, surrounded by dandelions and chalk drawings. Her voice softened into that sing-song tone only children know how to use. "Wait right here." Max immediately sat up straighter and froze. Not like an obedience-trained police dog responding to sit. This was different. His eyes locked on her. His body perfectly still, not because he'd been told to halt, but because he knew this moment. Lena smiled. Good boy. End of crete. The corners of his mouth curled just slightly, and he let out a soft woof, the same sound she used to call his yes bark. The room shifted. Even the judge leaned forward. Next, Lena stepped to the side and held out her arms. Come, show me happy. It wasn't a phrase found in any canine handbook. But Max leapt up, not aggressive, not wild, just joy. Pure, unstoppable, quivering joy. His tail wagged so fast it blurred. He bounded to her, stopped just short, and then rolled halfway onto his side, one paw in the air. It was their game, their happy trick. One only Lena had ever asked of him. Oh my God, Grace whispered, hands flying to her mouth. Max looked up at Lena and barked once. One more, Lena said, her eyes beginning to shimmer. She stepped back, voice barely a murmur. Paw promise? Max sat, lifted his right paw, and held it mid-air waiting, just like always. She stepped forward, pressed her tiny palm against his paw. Promise kept, she whispered. The sound that followed wasn't clapping. It was breath returning. People didn't even know they'd been holding it. Brooks knelt down, slowly, like the world had gone quiet around him. I've spent the last 2 years with this dog, he said softly, not to anyone in particular. We taught him the drills, bomb detection, suspect tracking, apprehension. He learned them all. He looked at Max, then at Lena. But he never did that. Judge Finch leaned back slowly. Are those commands part of your department's program? Brooks shook his head. Not even close. He turned to Lena. Where did you learn those phrases? I made them up, she said simply. When I was little. Max always liked it better when I talked to him. Like a friend, not like a boss. Max wagged his tail in quiet agreement. A silence settled over the room, no longer awkward but reverent. This isn't about just proving ownership, the judge said finally. This is about identity, memory, connection. Grace's voice cracked when she finally spoke. I thought he was gone, and then I told myself it was better if we forgot, that he was just one more thing we had to move on from. She turned to Lena. But you never forgot. You kept his name, his tag, his games. Lena looked at Max. I didn't forget, she said softly, because I didn't think he forgot me either. Max stepped closer to her now, gently pressing his head into her side. Lena wrapped her arms around him, not like someone hugging a stranger's dog, but like someone hugging home. The judge folded her hands, contemplative. We'll wait on the DNA confirmation, but for now, I think it's safe to say this dog remembers. Brooks nodded, swallowing hard. He never stopped waiting. Lena said, her voice just above a whisper. No one corrected her. Because in that moment watching a decorated police dog respond not to orders but to love, everyone understood. This wasn't a reunion. It was a promise. Finally kept. The courtroom had emptied, but the ache lingered. Later that day, inside a small waiting room off the side of the courthouse, Grace sat curled on a worn-out chair, her coat draped loosely around her, untouched coffee cooling in her trembling hands. Lena sat on the carpeted floor nearby, quietly petting Maxno, Axel, who hadn't moved from her side since the hearing. Across from them, Officer Brooks reviewed some notes, but his eyes kept flickering to the little girl and the dog who no longer belonged to him. The silence was full, weighty, until Grace finally spoke, her voice quiet and worn. It was raining that night, she began, her gaze distant. The kind of rain that makes you double-check every lock in the house. Lena looked up at her mother, still and attentive. You were 3, Grace said. And Max had only been with us a few months. Just a puppy, really. Big paws, clumsy as a deer in socks. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You named him after your favorite book, Mighty Max and the Hidden Star. Said he was going to grow up to be your hero. Lena didn't speak. Her small hand curled around Max's collar like it was tethering her to the past. I just finished folding laundry. You were asleep. Max was in his little bed by your door. And then, her voice cracked. Then the glass shattered. She closed her eyes. And just for a moment, the courthouse walls faded. She was back there inside that narrow, quiet house on Willow Street. The smell of rain, the sharp sound of intrusion. I didn't even have time to scream. I ran to you, scooped you up. You were crying, Max barking like he'd been lit on fire. Whoever they were, they'd kicked in the back door. Probably thought the place was empty. Grace gripped the edges of her coat tighter. I tried to get to the front, but they were already inside. Max kept barking, lunging. I shoved you into the coat closet, told you not to make a sound. I remember the way you were clutching his tail, refusing to let go. Lena whispered, "He didn't want to leave me." "No," Grace nodded. "But I had to shut the door. I told him to stay, and I think that was the last thing he ever listened to from me." Her voice cracked completely. They grabbed my purse, yanked open drawers. I remember screaming. The alarm finally went off and the whole house just exploded in sound. Somewhere in the chaos, Max slipped out. Maybe he chased them. Maybe he got scared. I don't know. But when the police arrived, he was gone. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the only interruption to the silence that followed. "We looked," she continued. "God, we looked. Posters on every corner. I filed reports, called shelters. You cried yourself sick for weeks. Then one night, I found you curled up in his dog bed. You had your flashlight. Said you were keeping it on in case Max found his way home in the dark." Officer Brooks exhaled softly, his voice hesitant. "He didn't have a chip?" "He did," Grace said, "but it was outdated. We had just moved new number, new address. I'd been meaning to update it, and then she broke off. I blame myself every day." Lena scooted closer, her hand resting on her mother's knee. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. "I told myself maybe someone kind had taken him in. Maybe he was safe, but it was easier to think he was dead than wonder if he was scared, wondering why we never came for him." Max let out a low, soft whine, resting his head on Lena's lap. Grace wiped at her face, ashamed of the tears, but unable to stop them. "I think part of you stopped being a kid that night," she whispered to Lena. "You were only 3, but your eyes, something in them changed. You stopped laughing. You stopped drawing. You stopped dreaming." Lena's lips pressed together, her gaze still fixed on Max. "I didn't stop dreaming," she said quietly. "I just kept them inside." Officer Brooks finally spoke again. 3 months after that date, Axel was found wandering a highway outside Ridgewood. No collar, scared, malnourished. We picked him up and sent him into the K9 program. He was a natural, fast, focused, too obedient for a stray. He looked at Lena, but he wouldn't respond to standard commands at first, only after months of retraining. Grace blinked. "That was Max," she said flatly. "He was already trained, just not by you." Brooks nodded slowly. "Now it makes sense." Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out the old, scratched dog tag. She handed it to Brooks. "This used to be shiny," she said, "but I held it a lot." He turned it over in his fingers. On one side, the engraved name, Max. On the other, in shaky block letters written with permanent marker, the words, "Come, show me happy." His smiled bittersweet. Max lifted his head and gently nudged Brooks's hand. "You were never just a dog," Brooks said to him. "You were someone's family." Lena leaned against Max, her voice no more than breath, and he found his way back. The room still held the scent of silence, that kind of heavy hush only truth could bring. Axel, the name given to him by the force lay, curled beside Lena, his eyes flickering shut in the comfort of her touch. But Officer Brooks remained upright in his chair, fingers laced, the crease between his brows deepening, as if the story inside him didn't want to be told but needed to be. He cleared his throat, his voice quiet, as if speaking too loudly might fracture the delicate moment. "We found him 3 years ago," Brooks began. "It was a cold morning, late October. We'd been tracking a burglary suspect near an old warehouse in the industrial district. Rundown place, full of broken glass, rusted scaffolding, abandoned crates, and him." He glanced at Max, his voice softening with something close to affection. He was crouched behind a stack of pallets, tail tucked, ribs showing. Looked like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. But his eyes, Brooks paused, remembering. They weren't the eyes of a stray. They were watchful, too calm, like he was waiting for someone. Grace looked down, pressing her hand to her chest. Lena didn't blink. When we approached, Brooks continued, he didn't growl, didn't bolt. He just stood up, walked right up to me and sat, like he was saying, "Okay, I'm ready." A strange quiet settled over the room. That kind of silence that felt less like the absence of noise and more like respect. "We scanned him for a chip," Brooks went on. "Nothing registered. No tags. No collar. Just a smudge of blue ink on his ear, probably, from some temporary marking long faded. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't scared. He just obeyed. Like he'd already been trained by someone who taught him how to trust." He let out a breath, rubbing his thumb over his palm. "We were short on K-9 recruits at the time. I was hesitant. Thought he might have run from a fight ring, or worse. But something about him told me he wasn't bred for violence. He was bred for purpose." Grace's eyes shimmered. Lena didn't move. "We brought him in, vetted him, fed him. And the first time I gave a command, he didn't react, just stared at me, like he was searching my voice for a memory that wasn't there." He looked down at Max, who now lay completely still but not asleep. He was listening. Brooks knew it. He always listened. But a week later, Brooks said, smiling faintly, he started responding. "Not because I taught him anything new. I think he just decided to trust me." There was reverence in his voice now. "The kind men reserved for soldiers and saints. We trained together at Evergreen K-9 Academy," he continued. "He learned fast, too fast. Like the knowledge was already inside him, just needed reawakened. He passed narcotics detection with top scores, tracked suspects through snowstorms, located a missing child in less than 3 hours, saved my life once when a dealer pulled a knife." His hand drifted to his side unconsciously, perhaps to the scar. "He never disobeyed, never hesitated, but he never played either. Never wagged his tail unless the job was done. We thought he was just focused. But maybe," Brooks glanced at Lena, "maybe he was just waiting. For her." Lena met his gaze. "He never forgot me," she whispered. Brooks nodded, solemn. "Number he didn't." Grace cleared her throat, her voice hoarse. "Why didn't anyone try to find his owner?" Brooks shook his head. "We filed a report, of course. Sent his picture to local shelters. But no chip, no ID, no one came forward. We don't have the resources to trace every found dog without identifiers. Once the system deemed him unclaimed, he became eligible for service, and he passed everything with distinction." Lena slowly reached into her backpack again. She pulled out a photo creased and faded from years of being kept like a secret wish. In the image, a younger Lena, gap-toothed and grinning, hugging a much smaller Max in front of a pumpkin display. He was still growing into his ears. Brooks took the photo gently, and for a moment, his throat tightened. "That's him," he said. Lena nodded. "He used to sit like that when he was confused. One paw, slightly raised." "Ugh." And just as she said it, Max stirred, lifting his paw exactly that way, resting it gently over her foot like an echo from another time. Grace swallowed a sob. "You called him Axel," Lena said quietly. "But he always answered to Max. You just never heard it." Brooks gave a sad smile. "You're probably right." There was a pause, the kind that lets the truth finally settle in. "You gave him a purpose," Grace said softly. "When we couldn't." "You gave him love," Brooks replied, "when he needed it most." They looked at the dog, still loyal, still torn between 2 lives, 2 families, 2 names. But neither side could deny it anymore. Max and Axel were the same. One belonged to the past, one had served the present, and now both would shape the future. The courtroom had never felt smaller. No one spoke, but everyone watched. Lena sat on the floor beside Axel Max, her Max's head still resting gently on her thigh like he'd finally made it home after 3 long winters. Her hand moved slowly through the thick fur between his ears, and the way his eyes softened, like fog lifting after a storm, said more than words could ever hold. But Grace knew silence wouldn't be enough. Not here. Not with officers in uniform and law carved into oak panels above their heads. So Lena stood. She looked small in the middle of the courtroom, her shoes scuffed, backpack slipping off one shoulder. But her voice was steady. "I know what you're all thinking," she said, glancing toward the judge. The jury, Officer Brooks, that maybe he just likes me, that dogs get confused sometimes, that I want something that isn't mine. She took a breath and reached into her bag again, this time slower, more deliberate. What emerged wasn't a file or a photo, but a rubber ball, faded orange, worn nearly smooth except for a line of tiny teeth marks. She held it up like a relic. This, she said quietly, was Max's favorite toy. Axel's ears twitched. The moment he saw the ball, he sat up straighter, his tail giving a soft thump on the floor. Lena knelt again, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the ball gently in front of him. I used to hide it under my pillow, and every night he'd find it no matter what. Like it was a game only we understood. The dog leaned forward, nose twitching. Then softly, reverently, he picked the ball up between his teeth. Not to chew, not to play, just to hold, like a memory. Gasps echoed, low and uncontainable. Grace pressed a hand to her lips. Officer Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat, watching as the dog, who had never once shown interest in toys during his entire service, now held the worn ball with a devotion that looked sacred. Lena wasn't done. She stood again and stepped closer to the bench, her voice barely more than a whisper. He has a scar behind his left ear. The bailiff looked to the judge, who gave a hesitant nod. Lena crouched beside Max and lifted his ear with care. There it was, a pale line, barely visible under the fur, about an inch long, faint, but there. She turned slightly so everyone could see. He got it when he tried to jump through the fence, she said. The week before he disappeared, he got stuck on the wire. I remember crying because he yelped, and then he licked my face to make me stop. Max leaned into her touch. Like he remembered too. A heavy silence spread through the room, this time not from tension but from awe, the kind of quiet that settles only when the heart recognizes something the mind still doubts. The judge shifted in her seat. Officer Brooks, she asked carefully, were you ever aware of this scar? Brooks shook his head slowly. I never noticed it. It's buried under the fur, and we don't typically inspect the ears unless there's a wound. Lena looked down at Max, her voice even softer now. There's one more thing. She sat again beside him, this time cradling his head in her lap like a lullaby was about to begin. And then, almost inaudibly, she began to hum. It was simple, a child's tune, made up more of feeling than melody, something between a lullaby and a secret promise. Max stilled. He blinked once. Then, without hesitation, he exhaled a long, slow breath and closed his eyes. The courtroom seemed to vanish around them. No sirens, no officers, no custody paperwork, just a girl and her dog remembering together. He used to fall asleep like this, Lena whispered, stroking the fur above his brow. He only ever did it when I hummed this song. I made it up when he was a puppy. Tears slipped down Grace's cheek, quietly, uncontrollably. Even Judge Hernandez seemed moved. She adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. I believe we've passed the point of coincidence, she said, her voice low but firm. At this point, we owe it to all parties, including the animal in question, to pursue a full DNA verification. The courtroom murmured, heads nodding. Officer Brooks looked down, not in defeat, but in recognition. Permission to submit a hair sample today, he said. Granted. Lena finally looked up, eyes wide and shining. Will it hurt him? Brooks knelt down beside her. No, he said gently. Just a few hairs. We'll make it quick. Max didn't flinch when the technician approached. He stayed still, as if he already knew, as if he understood what was happening, that his identity, his memories, his name were finally being restored. And even though the results would take days, the room felt like the answer had already arrived. In the wag of a tail, in the weight of a ball, in the way a dog sleeps when he's finally safe enough to dream. The sound of the gavel echoed on sharp, decisive before the judge's voice cut through the murmurs. We will take an extended recess. No objections. Just stunned silence. Court officers moved quickly, directing those involved out of the main courtroom. Lena held the worn ball close to her chest, Max walking obediently at her side, not by command, but by instinct, as if he feared losing her again. They were led down a quieter corridor, its fluorescent lights colder than the courtroom's warmth, past a security door and into a side conference room, lined with windows that let in too much light for how heavy the air felt inside. The door shut behind them. Now it was just the three of them: Grace, Lena, Officer Brooks, and the dog whose name changed depending on who was calling him. Axel. Max. A protector. A memory. A question none of them fully knew how to answer. No one spoke at first. Grace paced. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, sharp and restless. Brooks leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, not defensive, just overwhelmed. And Lena sat quietly in the corner of the room, legs tucked under her, both hands resting on Max's back like he was the only real thing left in her world. It was Grace who broke the silence. "This can't be happening." Her voice cracked not with disbelief, but with a grief she thought she had buried 3 years ago. She turned toward Brooks, eyes rimmed with red. "Do you understand what this means? That it might have been alive all this time and we didn't know?" Brooks didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, brows drawn. "I don't have the answers yet, ma'am," he said quietly. "But I saw what I saw in that courtroom." Grace shook her head, suddenly looking years older. "I put up posters for 6 months. We searched shelters, filed reports, drove to different cities when someone said they saw a dog that might be him. And every time we came home empty, I had to watch her shrink smaller and smaller into herself." She looked over at her daughter. Lina didn't look up. She stopped smiling. She stopped drawing. She just disappeared with him. Her voice caught again. "I tried to move on. I had to. For her. But you never really do you?" "No, ma'am," Brooks replied softly. "You don't." He pushed away from the wall, walking a little closer to the girl and the dog curled up beside her. Max's eyes tracked him, not hostile, not afraid, just aware. Brooks exhaled. "I trained him. I've worked with dozens of dogs, but this one, there was always something different. He was smart, sure, but he had these instincts. Like he wasn't learning for the first time, just remembering." Lena finally looked up. "He was remembering," she said quietly. "He used to wait at the door when I had bad dreams, before I even called him. He knew." She looked at Brooks, eyes wide but steady. "Did he ever sleep curled up in a corner, even if you called him to the bed?" Brooks blinked. "Every night." "That's because he only ever slept like that when he wasn't home." The room fell silent again. Grace sat down, slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What happens now?" Brooks scratched the back of his neck. "DNA tests are underway. They'll compare what we have on file with what you submit." "I already submitted his hair," Lena said, almost too quietly. "When we buried his old bed, I saved some, just in case." Grace stared at her daughter. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to make you sad again." That simple sentence leveled the room. No hysteria, no dramatics, just a child who had learned, too early, to hold her pain in her pocket and not let it spill over. Brooks turned to Grace, something softer entering his expression. "Ma'am, I swear to you, we never knew. No one brought in a report. No vet flagged anything. He came to us malnourished, no chip. Just quiet, like someone had taken the sound out of him." "He was stolen," Lena said suddenly. The air thickened. "I don't have proof yet," she admitted, looking down at Max. "But I know. That night wasn't random. Someone opened the gate. Someone opened the back door. And then he was just gone." Her voice cracked. "He never would have run." Max shifted, nudging her arm gently as if to say, "I didn't." Grace looked at her daughter, then at the dog, then at Brooks, somewhere between a mother and a witness, on the edge of something bigger than any of them. "This isn't just about a missing dog anymore," she said, eyes narrowing. "Someone took him. And we need to find out who." Brooks nodded slowly. "And why?" Max gave a low, nearly inaudible woof as if he agreed. The room felt heavier now, not from tension, but from the silence that always came after a truth had cracked open. Grace sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes not on anyone, but somewhere distant, as if the past 3 years had just hit her all over again. Lena clutched the worn ball in her lap. Max no. Axel to some lay at her feet, his head resting against her shin like he never wanted to move again. Officer Brooks stood near the doorway, hands on his hips, jaw tight as though he was trying to balance duty with disbelief. Then Grace spoke. I kept the fur. Brooks turned. She didn't look up, just pulled her purse closer and began digging through it. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice held steady. After we buried his blanket and toys, Lena cried herself to sleep for a week. I found her one morning curled up in the closet holding this. She pulled out a small, clear Ziploc bag, barely palm-sized, with tufts of dark, coarse fur inside. She'd brushed him the night before he disappeared. She said it still smelled like him. Lena nodded without speaking. Grace held the bag out. It's old, but it's clean, kept sealed. Brooks took it gently, like it was evidence from a sacred case. This might be enough, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Then he straightened. I'll need to request departmental approval for a DNA match. We'll use the hair sample from this bag and compare it to the canine database sample we collected during Axel's intake. Will it be conclusive? Grace asked. As conclusive as it gets. If this dog really is Max, we'll know. A pause. And if he isn't? Lena spoke this time. Then at least I'll know I tried. The judge's chambers door opened just then, and the bailiff gestured for them to follow. They walked back into the courtroom, not the main floor, but into a side area where Judge Patel waited behind a desk, robe still draped but eyes softer than before. He gestured for everyone to sit. Officer Brooks, the judge began. I've been briefed. You're requesting departmental resources to authorize DNA confirmation? Yes, Your Honor, Brooks replied, due to compelling behavioral evidence and new personal material submitted just now. The judge glanced toward Lena, then toward the plastic bag of fur now sealed inside a larger evidence envelope. And the girl claims this is a remnant from the dog who disappeared 3 years ago? Grace answered before anyone else could. Not just the girl, Your Honor. I'm her mother. I confirm the origin of the item. I brushed that dog, I bought that brush, and I sealed the bag. Patel nodded solemnly. Understood. He sat back in his chair, fingers steepled together thoughtfully. I've seen a great many things in this courtroom. Witnesses lie. Evidence gets twisted. But sometimes, the truth shows up in forms that can't be cross-examined. He looked down at the page before him. This courtroom witnessed a highly trained police, K-9-1, that's never responded to anyone outside his handler, OB. A set of non-standard commands, delivered not by an officer but by a child. We witnessed physical identifiers, emotional reactions, and a history of loss corroborated by multiple parties. A long pause. I believe this warrants verification. He turned to Brooks. Your request is approved. Brooks gave a quiet nod. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Patel's eyes moved to Lena. This process could take a few days. Are you prepared for that? Lena didn't hesitate. I waited 3 years. Something about the way she said it silenced the room. No drama, no tears. Just the clear voice of someone who'd already spent too long in the dark and wasn't afraid of a few more hours if it meant reaching the light. Patel gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Very well. Until results return, this dog remains under the temporary custody of the police department, pending administrative evaluation. But I strongly recommend supervised visitations with the family, given the emotional impact observed today. Grace exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Lena looked down at Max, who responded to her gaze with a slow-tail thump against the floor steady. Sure. They both knew. Science would catch up. The heavy doors of the courthouse creaked open, spilling sunlight onto the polished steps like the first breath after a storm. Lena walked slowly, one hand gripping her mother's, the other brushing against the fur beside her. Axel moved in stride calm, alert, and undeniably tethered to her presence in a way that no one could quite explain. A few reporters loitered outside, scribbling notes, their cameras lowered in a rare show of respect. Bystanders whispered but did not interrupt. Even the officers escorting them seemed to hold back, as if something sacred had just unfolded inside that courtroom, and no one wanted to break its spell. Then Lena stopped, right there on the steps, with traffic humming in the distance and a quiet summer wind brushing past her face. She let go of her mother's hand and knelt. Axel paused, then turned to face her. His ears twitched. His tail gave a slow, thoughtful wagnet, the brisk, alert kind seen in service dogs, but the soft, circular motion of a memory surfacing. Lena looked up at him, her eyes wide and shimmering with the kind of hope that children wear like armor when the world tries to tell them otherwise. You remember me, don't you? Her voice wasn't loud. She didn't need it to be. It wasn't a question for the crowd, the cameras, or even her mother. It was just for him. Axel, still watchful, took a step closer. His nose touched her cheek, warm and certain, before he gently pressed his head into her shoulder. Then came the lick. Soft, purposeful, placed just under her eye, where old tears had once dried. Not rushed, not random. As if his own instincts were searching for a path back through time, through noise, through names that were never his. The crowd didn't gasp this time. They simply paused, as if life itself had held its breath. Grace stood a step above them, watching. Her hand covered her mouth, eyes glistening. She hadn't believed not fully. She had wanted to protect her daughter from another heartbreak, from mistaking a gesture for a sign, a dog for a ghost. But this was not training. This was not coincidence. It was recognition. And it broke something open in her she hadn't known was still shut. Officer Brooks, standing just a few feet away, looked down at his partner. The dog, who had run through fire, tracked suspects, sat beside him in unmarked cars, and never once faltered. Axel had always been precise, professional, never distracted, never emotional. But now he was resting his head in the lap of a child, like he'd found something he'd been searching for without knowing it. Brooks knelt, slowly. His gaze shifted from Axel to Lena. "I've worked with this dog for almost 3 years," he said, low enough for just them to hear. "He's never done this with anyone." Lena didn't take her eyes off the dog. Because he didn't forget. He was just waiting. Axel shifted again, this time laying down completely. His body curled protectively around her legs. His breathing slowed. Note alert. Note on duty. At peace. The world moved on around them, voices echoing down marbled halls. Footsteps clattering against tile. Murmurs of reporters trading angles for the evening news. A bailiff coughed. A judge conferred with a clerk. The city went on, indifferent and unaware. But within that small circle of sunlight cast across the courthouse steps, where a patch of warmth met the cool stone, a moment unfolded that no courtroom could rule on, no piece of legislation could define, and no scientific method could truly measure. A reunion had taken place. Silent, gentle, and devastatingly real. Lena knelt there, her hand resting just above the collar on his neck. Axel. It read now bold letters, official. But to her, to the little girl who had once whispered secrets to him in the dark, who had danced barefoot with him in the summer rain, he would always be Max. He didn't move much, just leaned in, head tilted ever so slightly, like he was listening not to her voice now, but to something older, a memory, a smell, a heartbeat he had carried through fire and time and command training. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, but she wasn't crying from sorrow anymore. These were the kind of tears that came from remembering something so deeply it hurt and then realizing it had returned to you. The officer who held Axel's leash didn't pull. He didn't call the dog back. Maybe he felt it too, that whatever was happening here was sacred. A break in the rules, worth making. Lena whispered his name again, the real one, and his ears flicked in recognition. One paw shifted forward, closing the space between them. His nose brushed her wrist, and then, ever so gently, he let out a low whine, the kind only dogs make when they've been waiting too long for something their soul never forgot. Grace stood just a few steps behind her daughter, one hand over her mouth, the other gripping the railing as though letting go might unravel her. She had told Lena to prepare for disappointment, to be realistic. But watching this unfold, she realized something she hadn't dared to believe. Sometimes the heart knows what the eyes cannot see. Around them, people paused. Even the skeptical court stenographer stepped outside, blinking at the sight. One by one, whispers spread. But inside this fragile circle of light, none of it mattered. No media, no paperwork, no badge, no name tag. Just a girl, her dog, and a waiting heart that had never stopped calling home. He had found her not with GPS, not with scent cues or training drills, but with something older and quieter, a thread spun between soul and memory, a pull stronger than time, loss, or logic. And as Lena pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "You came back," the world seemed to hold its breath. Because in a world full of noise and chaos, sometimes the most extraordinary thing is simply being remembered, being found. And that day, beneath the courthouse sun, a Bond thought lost forever had answered back. The door to their small home creaked open with a long sigh, as if even the house had been holding its breath. It had been a long day. A long few years, really. Grace reached to turn on the hallway light, but Lena moved past her in silence, her steps soft and focused, like someone returning to a place that had never quite stopped breathing. She didn't speak, didn't ask for dinner or change out of her shoes. She just made her way to the hallway closet, the one where forgotten things lived. Grace watched, uncertain. "Sweetheart, are you?" "I remember where I put them," Lena said softly. "The boxes. They're still here, right?" Grace hesitated. "They should be." Lena pulled down a cardboard box marked in faded pink marker. Max's stuff. Her breath hitched when her fingers brushed the lid. The cardboard was soft with time, a little crushed on one corner. But it held. It had held for years. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, as if the gravity of what was inside demanded a ritual. One by one, the past spilled gently into the present. A frayed tennis ball with tiny bite marks still faintly smelling of grass and warm afternoons. A blue bandana folded into a triangle, still bearing the faint trace of Lena's glittery handwriting. "My best boy." A small photo album. On the cover, a printed sticker that read, "Paw prints forever." She opened it. There was a picture of her much younger, grinning with missing front teeth, holding a German Shepherd puppy with oversized ears and sleepy eyes, his tongue lolled to the side. The caption below said simply, "Day 1. Max is finally home." Grace knelt beside her now, silently, pulled in by the memories they had both tried to shelve away like old furniture. "I remember that morning," she whispered. "You wouldn't eat breakfast. You just waited by the window until the van arrived." Lena smiled faintly. He tripped over his own paws running to me. They flipped through the album photos of muddy paws, Christmas mornings, first baths, evidence not just of a dog, but of a life lived together, of a bond too big for words and too deep for time. Then Lena paused. In the bottom of the box, beneath layers of paper and an old tug toy, she found a small flash drive taped to the inside. "What's that?" Grace asked. I think it's the video I made for school. The one where I showed Max's secret language. Remember? You helped me edit it." They plugged it into the old laptop, dusted off from a drawer. The screen flickered. Then a young voice filled the living room, a younger Lena, barely 5, standing in a backyard filled with golden leaves. Her cheeks were rounder, her laughter higher. "And now, this is Max showing how smart he is," the tiny Lena declared to the camera. "We don't use boring words. We have our own ones." On screen, the puppy tilted his head. "Show me happy," the child said. The dog sprang up, wagging his tail and spinning in a joyful circle. "Paw of promise." The puppy gently placed a paw on her open hand. "Wait right here like a good night," she said theatrically. The dog sat perfectly still, and when she whispered, "Tell me secret," the dog pressed his forehead against hers. Grace didn't realize she was crying until her hands trembled in her lap. That's Axel," she breathed. "No," Lena corrected gently. "That's Max, just with a different name now." The screen dimmed, but the silence it left behind was anything but empty. It was thick with knowing, with weight, with the unspoken understanding that some connections do not dissolve with time. They change, maybe, disguise themselves, but they do not vanish. Lena leaned against her mother's shoulder, holding the ball in her lap like a relic. "I wasn't just being a silly kid," she whispered. "He remembered me. He chose me." Grace put an arm around her daughter, resting her cheek on Lena's hair. "I believe you now. Every part of me does." Down the hallway, near the front door, Axel lay curled on the rug. He hadn't moved since they entered, but now his ears perked as if he'd caught a distant echo of a song only he could hear. Lena turned to look at him. "Do you want to watch it, Max?" she asked softly. He rose, walked to the center of the room, and sat facing the laptop. Lena hit play again, and as the little girl on screen giggled and tossed a toy, the real dog leaned forward and gave one soft, knowing whine like a memory returning home. The precinct was unusually quiet that night. No chatter in the hallway, No ringing phones, just the distant hum of a vending machine and the soft flicker of an overhead bulb refusing to die. Officer Ethan Brooks sat alone at his desk, the thin blue folder in front of him looking heavier than it should have. It was Axel's personnel file his entire history with the Force, from the moment they found him near that warehouse to his commendations, mission logs, and K-9 training evaluations. He opened it slowly, not because he feared what he'd find, but because something in his gut had started whispering what he already knew, and it scared him more than he cared to admit. Axel, his partner, his shield, the dog who'd saved his life more than once might not have been the dog the system said he was. He flipped to the intake form. Date: the 3rd of October. 3 years ago. Unchipped male German Shepherd. Approximate age: 1.5 years. Found near abandoned textile warehouse, 11th and Fremont. End. Brooks stared at the address. 3 blocks from where Lena's family reported Max missing. He hadn't noticed that before. Back then, it had just been another stray, scared and underfed but responsive, a rarity in itself. K-9 trainers had flagged him immediately. Unusual potential, high emotional intelligence, non-standard command response. Brooks turned the page. There it was again, underlined in blue ink. Dog does not respond consistently to standard military police cues. Suspect previous imprinting or alternative training. He leaned back in his chair. The truth had been staring them in the face from day one, and no one asked why. He clicked open the video archive and pulled up one of Axel's earliest evaluation sessions. The timestamp showed a nervous-looking pup sitting across from a stern trainer, holding out a hand and barking the command, "Stay." Axel cocked his head. The trainer repeated louder, "Stay." Still no movement. But then, something strange happened. The trainer muttered half to himself, "Guess you're just gonna wait there like a statue, huh?" And that's when Axel sat. Eyes alert, posture still. Brooks hit pose. Heart thudding, he opened the next log. Obstacle course trial. The trainer had shouted, "Jump, nothing. Go, nothing." Then, frustrated, he said, "Show me brave, boy." Trying to coax cooperation, Axel had launched over the wall immediately. Brooks stared at the screen. That wasn't obedience. That was memory. He stood abruptly and walked to the evidence locker, punching in the code and pulling out the black duffel marked Axel Tactical Gear. From its side pocket, he pulled out the tug toyest in all bonding exercises, meant to reward and build connection between handler and K-9. It was barely worn. Brooks swallowed hard. Axel didn't tug. Not with him. Never had. He always preferred placing his head in Brooks's lap, nuzzling gently, like seeking quiet understanding instead of adrenaline. At the time, Brooks had chalked it up to personality. Not every K-9 was textbook. But now he saw it for what it was. A dog built on love, not drills. A knock at the glass startled him. It was Officer Patel, looking curious. "You still here?" "Yeah," Brooks replied, voice low. "Couldn't sleep." He gestured toward the screen. "Anything weird about this footage to you?" Patel leaned in, watched, then blinked. "Huh. He only responds when the trainer's off script." Brooks nodded. "That's what I'm seeing, too." "You thinking he's not regulation?" Brooks hesitated. "I'm thinking he might have belonged to someone else before us. Someone who didn't use commands. Someone who just talked to him." There was silence. Then Patel said, "The girl, Lena. She used weird phrases, right?" "Come, show me happy," Brooks repeated, almost reverently. "Paw of promise." "Wait like a good night. Stuff no trainer would teach." And Axel responded. Brooks closed the folder. His fingers lingered on the name label. Or maybe I should stop calling him that. He thought of the way the dog had looked at Linenot like a stranger, like a compass that had finally found true north after years of spinning. He sat there a while longer after Patel left, the quiet once again wrapping around him like a second skin. In the corner of the room, Axel lay curled beneath the bench, where he always waited after patrol-silent, watchful, heart steady. Brooks looked at him now with different eyes, not as a partner forged by training, but as a soul with a story. "Who were you before us, Max?" he whispered. "And how did we not see it?" The dog's ear flicked in response, his tail giving one slow thump against the floor. Brooks leaned back in his chair, 1,000 thoughts crashing against the edges of logic and loyalty. Tomorrow, the DNA results would come in. But tonight, a different kind of truth had already surfaced. quiet, patient, undeniable. And it had 4 legs, a scar behind its ear, and a heart that never forgot. The night fell soft over the city, folding its noise into hush. In the small guest bedroom of Grace's house, the only sound was the faint ticking of an old alarm clock, and the muffled wind outside pressing gently against the window pane. The curtains swayed as if breathing, and beneath them, Lena lay curled on her side, one hand resting on a worn photo tucked beneath her pillow. In the picture, a younger version of herself beamed at the camera, cheeks sticky with popsicle, arms thrown around a lanky German shepherd with one ear flopped sideways and eyes bright with devotion. The name Max was scribbled in purple crayon on the back, faded now, but still legible. In her dream, she was back in the field behind their old house before the fences were taken down, before the locks, the panic, the silence. The grass was wild and golden. Brushing her knees, Max ran ahead, ears flying, tongue lolling, spinning in tight circles until she caught up. She called out, laughing, "Come show me happy!" And he did. He bolted back to her with such joy in his limbs. It painted the wind. He leapt and twisted and nuzzled into her chest until they both tumbled to the ground, breathless and bright, like the world had never known pain. Lena stirred. Her brows furrowed as if her soul could feel the dream slipping. Then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. Tears wet her lashes. But she was smiling. It wasn't just a dream. Not anymore. The ache she carried for years, the shape of Max in her memory, the way his head tilted, the specific sound his tail made against linoleum wasn't fading with time. It was rising again, clearer now than ever. She sat up in bed, blinking in the low light. Outside the door, a figure paused. Grace had been standing there for minutes, watching the slow rhythm of her daughter's breath, letting herself pretend everything was okay, that they were just 2 people who had never lost anything. That life was linear. Kind. But it wasn't. And still, some kind of mercy had returned, in the form of a courtroom, a uniformed officer with doubt in his eyes, and a dog who knew childhood commands, like they were etched in bone. She stepped in quietly now, bare feet on hardwood, and sat at the edge of Lena's bed. Her daughter looked up, a question poised behind her soft gaze. But Grace didn't answer it. Instead, she brushed a strand of hair from Lena's forehead and let her fingers linger memorizing her daughter's piece, something she hadn't seen in years. "You dreamed of him again, didn't you?" she asked. Lena nodded. "He remembered how to show me happy," she whispered. Grace exhaled shakily and lowered her eyes. Maybe it's him after all." The words hung in the air like steam, hopeful, fragile, desperate not to break. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There were too many ifs, too many things they didn't know. But somehow, in the quiet, it didn't matter. Because something ancient and sacred had already been set in motion. Lena rested her head on Grace's lap, just like she used to during the worst of it after the posters were torn down, after no one called, after even the police stopped returning emails. She curled there now, not as a child seeking protection, but as a heart choosing trust again. Grace looked down at her, eyes shimmering. She reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a thin, transparent envelope. Inside was a soft, tan fur clump taped carefully to an index card. Max's fur, found at the bottom of Lena's toy box. Almost forgotten. But now, maybe the thread that tethered 2 timelines back together. Grace held it for a moment, pressed it to her chest, and closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular. "If he's out there, if this isn't just our hearts playing tricks, let tomorrow prove it." She kissed the top of Lena's head and sat there in silence, rocking gently. As the wind outside softened into stillness, and somewhere in the city, under a different roof, Axel lay awake. He was curled at the foot of a bunk in the precinct, his ears flicking occasionally at distant sounds, but his eyes half closed, not with fear, but a kind of quiet awareness, as if he knew something was coming, as if he too remembered fields and laughter, and a girl with a voice like summer. The morning light was pale, almost hesitant, as if it too wasn't sure what this day might bring. Outside Grace's home, a modest silver hatchback pulled into the driveway. The logo on the side read, "Dr. Elena Morrow, Mobile Veterinary Services." The engine cut, and from the driver's side stepped a woman in her early 50s, her lab coat half buttoned, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Her eyes, though tired from long hours, carried a softness that people instinctively trusted. Inside, Lena stood by the window, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Axel sat beside her, calm but alert, his gaze following every shadow that moved outside the glass. When the car door clicked shut, his ears perked not in alarm, but recognition of routine. He stood, tail still, as if sensing this was no ordinary vet call. Grace opened the door before Dr. Morrow could knock. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice hushed. The vet smiled gently. "This isn't the strangest house call I've made, but it might be the most important." They moved to the living room, which had been carefully prepared. Lena had set out the sealed bag containing Max's old fur sample. Next to it were a pair of baby, sock-stattered and chewed on one end and a faded green tennis ball with a single tooth mark on its rubber skin. Dr. Morrow crouched down to meet Axel at eye level. "Well, aren't you handsome?" she murmured. "You don't look like you're ready to give away secrets today." Axel simply tilted his head and sniffed her hand. Then, with surprising gentleness, he rested his chin on her knee just for a second before returning to Lena's side. That's something he always did with visitors," Lena whispered, tears catching at the back of her throat. "He'd greet them, and then check back to make sure I was okay." Dr. Morrow didn't respond right away. She just nodded and pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "Let's get started." She worked methodically. From Axel, she collected 2 buccal, swabs-long, cotton-tipped sticks rubbed carefully along the inside of his cheek. He didn't flinch, didn't resist. It was as if he understood the gravity of what was happening. Grace passed her the sealed fur bag. Dr. Morrow inspected it under a small magnifier, then nodded. "It's been well preserved. Enough follicular material here to attempt mitochondrial DNA sequencing." She turned to Lena. "These other items, you said they were Max's favorites?" Lena nodded. "He used to take that ball everywhere. Slept with the socks. 2 know it's a long shot, but maybe there's still something." Dr. Morrow took the ball and carefully sealed it inside a sterile pouch. "It's possible. We'll run tests for trace saliva and epithelial cells. I won't leave retrieving viable DNA from this. Will be harder. But if even one of these items gives us a usable comparison, we might get a match." Might. The word landed with weight. Lena glanced at Axel, who had quietly curled up at her feet, his head resting across her toes like an anchor. She reached down and brushed her fingers through the fur behind his left ear right, where the old scar lived. He didn't move, just sighed. Dr. Morrow finished packing the samples and stood. "It'll take a few days," she said softly. "I'll expedite everything I can, but we're dealing with forensic timelines, not just veterinary ones." Grace walked her to the door. "And if it is a match?" Dr. Morrow paused, her hand on the frame. "Then you'll have proven something that science rarely gets to witness, a memory that runs deeper than blood." She left quietly, her car pulling away with a low hum, disappearing down the street like a question unanswered. Back inside, the living room felt strangely quieter than before. Lena sat on the edge of the couch, the tennis ball still visible under its sterile pouch on the table. Grace brought over a cup of tea, but Lena didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned forward and whispered toward Axel words so low only he could truly hear. "You remember the green ball, don't you? You never let anyone else take it." Axel looked up, ears flicking. Then, without hesitation, he walked over to the table, nudged the edge with his nose, and let out a small, brief whine, a sound full of something ancient, something known. Lena blinked hard. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe memory had never needed proof in the first place. But they waited now for paper, for results, for the invisible code that might finally say what their hearts already feared to hope. It began with a blurry photo, a courthouse hallway, grainy from poor lighting. In the frame, a young girl kneeling beside a German shepherd, her hand resting gently between his ears, his eyes closed. Hers full of something too old for her age hope, straining against years of loss. No one knew who leaked it. Maybe someone inside the courtroom. Maybe a reporter with good instincts and bad ethics. But by morning, the photo had been shared over 10,000 times. The girl who found her dog in court. That was the first headline. Beneath it, words like miracle, long lost, and emotional custody battle were strung together in breathless paragraphs. The story was too good to ignore, too tender to resist. By the end of the day, news vans sat idle near the courthouse steps. Reporters with plastic smiles rehearsed their live shots. Microphones dangled like fishing lines, waiting for someone to bite. Grace turned off the television after the fourth segment aired. She looked to Lena, curled up on the couch with Axel's head in her lap, and muted the screen before the anchor could say the word reunion again. "They don't even know if it's true," Grace whispered to herself. "They don't know anything." But truth didn't seem to matter. Not yet. At school, Lena became the girl everyone stared at, but no one spoke to. Teachers fumbled through lessons. Classmates whispered when she walked by. Someone taped a printed screenshot of the article on her locker, circled in red marker. "Lost dog found girl." She tore it down without a word. At the precinct, Officer Brooks walked past a cluster of fellow officers huddled around a monitor. They quickly minimized the browser, but not before he caught the tail end of the headline. "Is K9 Axel actually a kid's missing pet?" He said nothing, just kept walking. Later, he found someone had scribbled on Axel's kennel card with Sharpie, "Hero or hoax?" He crossed it out and left the room without a sound. Across town, a local blogger posted a video titled, "Dog Who Knew Her Name," pulling clips from courthouse footage, Axel turning his head when Lena said Max, the way he licked her cheek, the moment he sat beside her, and refused to move. The comment section exploded. "You can't fake that kind of bond. I'm crying and I don't even know them." Let the girl have her dog. Case closed. But not all voices were kind. Probably just looking for attention. Dogs like anyone with food. What if the K9 team loses a trained asset over a sob story? Grace avoided social media altogether. It was safer that way. Instead, she focused on keeping Lena steady feeding her routine, shielding her from the noise, pretending the world outside wasn't building a narrative faster than the truth could catch up. Still, it found its way in. That evening, as Lena brushed Axel's coat in the living room, she asked quietly, "What if they take him away again?" Grace crouched beside her. "We're doing everything we can, sweetie. Everything. But the world." Lena looked down. "It doesn't always care." Axel shifted his weight, leaning gently into her hand. A silent reassurance. The kind that didn't require evidence or approval. Just presence. Outside, someone snapped a photo through the front gate. A flash like lightning, then footsteps retreating. Grace closed the curtains. 2 blocks away, at a local diner, a radio played softly overhead. In local news today, a child's fight to reclaim her long-lost dog has captured the town's heart and the internet's curiosity. The K9 in question, currently serving as a police K9 under the name Axel, may in fact be a missing pet named Max from 6 years ago. A DNA test is pending. A waitress paused mid-coffee pour. "That's the shepherd from the station, isn't it?" A customer nodded. "If it's true, that's one hell of a story." Even the mayor's office released a careful statement. "We are monitoring the situation and trust the judicial process to guide this unique case with fairness and compassion." Fairness. Compassion. Grace wondered when those words started needing official reminders. The next morning, outside the courthouse, someone left a bouquet tied with a note. "For Max, or Axel, or whoever you are. You matter." Lena found it as they walked in. She didn't say anything, just held the flowers close to her chest like a promise. Inside, the hallways were buzzing louder than ever. Journalists with badges, strangers with phones, whispers ricocheting like echoes of a verdict not yet spoken. And at the center of it all, a girl, a dog, and a question neither science nor sentiment had yet answered. The courtroom had never been this full. Even the judge seemed smaller behind the raised bench, dwarfed by the presence of cameras, onlookers, and a collective breath held taut in the air. Lena sat in the front row beside Grace, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair, white-knuckled. Officer Brooks stood behind them, one hand resting gently on Axel's harness, the other clenched into a fist he wouldn't let tremble. Axel No Leash now sat poised, calm but alert, like he always knew this moment would come. At the witness stand stood Dr. Felton, the DNA specialist. Her lab coat had been traded for a blazer, but the nerves in her posture remained clinical. She adjusted the mic, her voice steady but soft. "The test," she began, eyes moving gently between the judge, the attorneys, and the child before her, was conclusive. A pause. A silence that stretched like it wanted to break. She turned the page on her report. Based on mitochondrial DNA extracted from the fur sample found in the child's belongings, and the sample taken from the dog currently identified as Axel, the results show a genetic match. Her voice didn't waver, but the room did. A match? The judge echoed, blinking behind his glasses. Yes, Your Honor. Statistically significant. This is the same dog. It was Grace who gasped, first a sharp intake of air like surfacing from underwater. But it was Lena who broke. Her small body folded forward in an instant, tears spilling freely as she whispered into her hands. I knew it. I knew it was him. Axel turned. No command. No call. He moved to her side like a magnet drawn home. He gently nudged her arm, then slowly, with the calm of certainty, rested his head in her lap, as if to say, I knew too. Lena sobbed harder, one hand cradling his face, the other tangled in the thick fur behind his ears. The courtroom stood still. No one moved. Even the clatter of the stenographer's keys paused, as though even the record itself didn't want to disrupt what was unfolding. From the back of the room, a woman sniffled. A man removed his hat. A bailiff wiped at his eye. Before anyone could see, Grace leaned forward, her hand gently resting on Lena's back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, her daughter wasn't missing something anymore. On the bench, the judge leaned back, exhaled slowly, and removed his glasses to wipe them. Well, he said, voice low but reverent, that may be the most extraordinary testimony this court has ever received, spoken or unspoken. He looked at Axel, then at Lena. Sometimes, he murmured, truth doesn't bark. It waits. There was a flicker of emotion, a court reporter reaching for a tissue, an officer lowering his head, murmurs swelling like quiet applause against restraint. Brooks stepped forward, clearing his throat, requesting immediate reevaluation of Axel's placement, Your Honor. Given the confirmation and the emotional impact, the judge raised a hand gently. Understood. We'll enter deliberation regarding departmental jurisdiction and reclassification of K-9 status. But first, he looked directly at Lena. You waited. You believed. That matters in this court. Lena nodded through tears, her hand never leaving Axel's fur. I didn't just believe, she whispered. I remembered. So did he. Axel thumped his tail once, soft and sure, as if sealing the truth. The judge smiled inly, a little but enough. I believe you. The gavel didn't fall yet, but it didn't need to, because sometimes justice doesn't wait for the sound of polished wood striking a bench. Sometimes it arrives silently, the way a dog's ears perk up at the sound of a forgotten voice, or how a girl's hands tremble as they reach for something she thought she'd lost forever. In that moment, the law paused not in defeat, but in deference. It stepped aside for something older, something deeper, something no statute could define, something like love, something like proof. Axel stood at the center of the courtroom, rigid and still. His uniform vest clung to his strong frame, the word K-9 Unit Street etched in bold across his side. But his eyes, God, his eyes weren't trained on his handler, or the judge, or the towering figure of legal authority before him. They were on her. Lena. She hadn't moved since the door opened, and he entered. Not even a breath dared escape her lips at first. But her eyes spoke volumes wide, wet, and filled with that impossible, aching hope that only a child could hold on to for years without letting it rot into bitterness. Her lips parted. One word, one name, Max. It wasn't the name he bore on paper now. It wasn't the identity that had been stamped into databases and files and training manuals. But it was the name buried beneath the commands, beneath the certifications, beneath the missions and leashes and tactical obedience. It was the name whispered to him by a child's voice during thunderstorms. The name spoken through giggles, during backyard games, and whispered wishes before sleep. And he heard it. Axel, no, Max took one slow, deliberate step forward. The courtroom held its collective breath. Brooks, his handler, said nothing. His hand remained on the leash, but loose, unmoving. This wasn't his decision to make anymore. It was Max's. Another step. Lena's knees buckled slightly as she stood. Grace gasped. hand flying to her mouth. Her heart caught in the tangled space between fear and awe. The judge, usually a stern presence with a reputation for never wavering, leaned back ever so slightly, his fingers frozen midair, suspended above the handle of the gavel. It was as if even he, a man of rule and order, could sense what was happening, something that surpassed legal precedent. Max moved again, then again. 4 steps, then 5. And then, in a moment no lawyer could object to, no clerk could transcribe fast enough, he trotted across the floor and buried his head in the curve of Lena's chest. She sank to her knees, arms folding around him with the desperation of a shipwrecked survivor clinging to driftwood. Her shoulders shook, her voice breaking open with a sob that had waited years to be released. "You're really here," she whispered into the fur at his neck. "You came back." Max let out a soft whine low and guttural, the sound of recognition meeting relief. The entire courtroom seemed to dissolve. The floorboards, the pews, the high ceilings, and fluorescent lights, all of it faded into the background, replaced by the quiet hum of a truth finally made whole. People around them stood frozen. Some were wiping their eyes, pretending not to. One of the jurors held a trembling hand to her heart. Even the bailiff, a former Marine known for his rigid discipline, blinked away something that looked suspiciously like tears. No one said a word, because there was nothing to say. What they witnessed wasn't about case numbers or chain of custody records. It wasn't about who owned what or what department issued which badge. This was about a bond that had outlived separation, outlasted silence, and endured even when the world told them it shouldn't. This was about a dog who had waited through years, a girl who never let go, and a room full of strangers who, for one breathless moment, saw something real enough to hush every doubt. The judge slowly lowered his hand, letting it rest beside the gavel. His voice, when it came, was softer than anyone expected. "I've presided over cases involving murder, fraud, corporate empires. I've seen more heartbreak in these walls than I care to remember. But never." He paused, clearing his throat. "Never have I seen something that rendered the law unnecessary." He looked to Officer Brooks. "To deny what we've all seen today would be an injustice far greater than any crime." Officer Brooks gave a slow nod, the tension in his jaw loosening. "He was never just ours," he said, voice thick. "We borrowed him, but she raised him." And Lena, still holding on to Max like she might lose him again if she let go, lifted her face toward the judge. Her eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were grateful, anchored. He belonged to her. He always had. And finally, the world agreed. The courtroom hadn't fully settled from the tremor of truth that had just shaken its foundations when Judge Morrison gently cleared his throat. "Before we let emotion sweep us too far," he said, measured and grave, "we must address the matter that still sits uncomfortably beneath all this." The room quieted again. The joy in Lena's eyes faded to a flicker of uncertainty. The judge continued, turning his attention to the department's legal counsel. "The dog Axelis, as per record, property of the state. Specifically, he is an active-duty police canine under contract with the city of Riverview." A hush fell like a heavy curtain. Grace's hand instinctively reached for Lena's by "I'm not trying to diminish what we just witnessed," the judge added, voice softening. "But we are walking a tightrope between law and heart, and law, however slow, must still walk its line." From the far side of the room, Officer Brooks stood. Not rushed, not dramatic. He just rose, spine tall, face solemn. His voice, when it came, was clear. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge nodded. "Please, Officer Brooks." Brooks stepped forward, boots echoing softly on the polished floor. He didn't bring papers, no statements, no affidavits. Just truth. "I was there the day Axel was found," he began. "He wasn't microchipped, no tags. No one came forward. He was underweight, injured but alert, smart. We took him in and trained him." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "He passed every test. Smell, obedience, tracking. But the one thing he did best was protect." His gaze shifted to Lena, then to Axel, who now lay at her feet like he belonged nowhere else. "And yes, Brooks said slowly. He served honorably. He stopped armed suspects. He saved lives, mine included. The judge nodded. And yet, Brooks took a breath. And yet, I've worked with dozens of dogs, sir. I've read every training manual the department's got. Axel has always been different. Not just capable wired different. He didn't learn certain commands. He already knew them. Murmurs stirred from the benches. Brooks stepped closer. It's like he had another life before us. Another family. Another child. The courtroom stilled again. Which, Brooks said gently, we now know to be true. Judge Morrison folded his hands. So you believe the dog's service, however honorable, was built on an identity not fully known? Brooks didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. Silence again. The kind that tastes like steaks. Then tell me, the judge said, do you believe he can still serve? That he belongs in the line of duty, despite what we now know? Brooks looked down at the little girl, her hand resting on Axel's back, his tail thumping against her boots. Then back at the judge. I believe Axel already served, Brooks said. Twice. First as Max 4, a child who loved him enough to search years. Then, as Axel 4, a badge that trained him to be a tool. He swallowed, voice low but certain. I believe the service that mattered more is sitting right there in the front row. The room seemed to lean forward, breath caught in the fold of the moment. Brooks raised his eyes, locked with the judge's. And with all respect, sir, if you still ask who he belongs to, you're not listening to him. Axel, almost on cue, raised his head, looked to Brooks, then back to Lena, then closed his eyes again. Home. The judge leaned back in his seat, silent for a beat too long. He looked down at the thick folder before him, the record of Axel's deployments, his victories, his citations. Then he looked at the girl holding his heart. I will need departmental clearance, he finally said. Written acknowledgement of release, potential transfer of ownership, official documentation. Brooks nodded. I'll get it. The judge offered a soft, crooked smile. I don't want to stand between a hero and his child, he murmured. But the law doesn't let go without a little paperwork. And with that, the gavel struck not a final sentence, but a permission. A pause with promise. A step closer. Lena turned to Officer Brooks, her voice quiet but shaking. Does that mean he can come home? Brooks crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. I think, he said with a smile too full to hide. He already has. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the quiet room-neutral walls, a conference table too big for the 3 people seated around it. Outside, the courthouse had mostly emptied, but inside, something weightier than legal debate still lingered. Grace sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of cooling tea, her shoulders drawn tight, eyes darting between Officer Brooks and the manila folder the judge had left with them. Inside was Axel's entire service record commendations, deployments, the list of people he'd helped, the lives he'd protected. But none of it could explain the way he had laid his head in Lena's lap, as if it was the only place he'd ever known. Brooks sat stiffly across from her, his uniform loosened at the collar, sleeves rolled. He wasn't the officer now, just a man trying to find the line between duty and doing what's right. And sometimes those lines blurred so painfully they became indistinguishable. Lena wasn't in the room. She was outside with Axel still Max and her eyes playing in the grass near the parking lot. From time to time, Grace could hear her laugh, light and wind-carried, followed by the familiar thump of a wagging tail. Grace took a breath. Can I say something without all the legalese getting in the way? Brooks looked up. Please. She hesitated. The kind of hesitation only a mother knows the fear of offering something too hopeful, too fragile. I know he's a working dog, she said softly. I know he's still under contract, that there's policy and process and paperwork thicker than that folder. Brooks didn't interrupt. But I also know my daughter hasn't laughed like that in 3 years. Her voice cracked on the word 3. Brooks's face softened. Grace looked down at her hands, thumb tracing the seam on her cup. I'm not asking to take him away from the force. I'm not even asking to own him. I'm asking for something human, something kind. She met his eyes again. Let him stay with us when he's off duty. Let him be Max when he's not Axel. Brooks leaned back in his chair, exhaling hard through his nose. That's not how these things usually work. Grace nodded. Nothing about this has been usual. He didn't argue. It's just, she added, voice quiet now. Some part of her still wakes up every morning hoping it was all just a bad dream, that he never went missing, that he never got turned into someone else's dog. She used to leave her window open at night, even in the snow, just in case he came back. Brooks looked away, blinking fast. Grace's tone deepened, as if she was talking to something inside him, not just the man in front of her. You said it yourself. He's different. You noticed it. Felt it. That's not programming. That's memory. That's love that didn't forget. Brooks rubbed his jaw, eyes scanning the blank tabletop for answers that weren't there. If I say yes, if I let this happen, I risk losing my partner. You're not losing him, Grace said, gently but firmly. You'd be giving him back, the part of him that still dreams in a little girl's voice. He glanced toward the window, as if the wind might carry in one of those laughs again. Then back to Grace. And if she has to say goodbye again? Grace looked down, swallowing the weight of that possibility. Then at least it'll be on her terms, with memory instead of mystery, with his scent on her clothes and not just in her mind. Silence. Only the soft creak of Brooks's chair as he shifted, the hum of something unspoken. Finally, he sighed, the kind of sigh that lets something go. She can't come to the station. No handler's going to allow that. I understand. And there'll be times he's gone for days, maybe weeks, dangerous calls, border patrol shifts. I can't promise he'll always come back without scars. Grace's voice was steady. She just needs to know he's still hers, even a little. Another beat passed. Brooks reached into his pocket, pulled out a small rubber ring from his keychain, the kind that clips to a working dog's collar. He turned it in his palm for a long time before sliding it across the table. On his off days, he said quietly, you clip this to his harness. That tells dispatch he's not deployable. Grace stared at the ring so simple, yet holding the weight of 1,000 prayers. You do that for her? I'd do it, Brooks said, because I've seen dogs work miracles, and I've seen little girls keep promises longer than most men. A breeze drifted in through the cracked window. Outside, Lena's voice called out soft, excited. Max, come here, boy. And the gallop of paws followed, joyful, sure, like he'd been waiting years to be called by his name again. It wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. By the time the courthouse doors opened that morning, the marble steps were lined with cameras, reporters, curious onlookers, and people holding handmade signs with drawings of German shepherds. Others with a single phrase scribbled in childlike font, "Let Max come home." Inside, the atmosphere was reverent, not quiet, but respectful. Like the room itself understood it was about to witness something more than paperwork, something that could only be called mercy if mercy had a badge. The judge, a woman with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from her collar, looked out over the small crowd in the courtroom. She cleared her throat gently. In 32 years on the bench, she began, I have never been asked to issue a joint custodial ruling on a police officer. A few quiet chuckles stirred mostly from those in uniform. Her gaze settled on Lena, seated in the front row between her mother and Officer Brooks. She wore a simple blue dress, her hand resting gently on Axel's back, fingers buried in the fur that had once soaked up her childhood tears. The judge continued, But I've also never seen a case where a working dog sat beside a child as if they shared a heart. She looked down at the document before her. With the full consent of the police department, the K-9 handler, and the family of the minor child Lena Brooks, I hereby approve the conditional shared custody of the service dog known as Axel, formerly Max. The words seemed to hang for a moment, suspended in stillness. Then, applause. It started small from the back of the room, where one of the precinct officers stood wiping a tear from beneath his mustache. Then it spread like something inevitable, like joy that had been waiting years for permission to speak. Lena didn't clap. She simply turned to Axel and whispered, We did it, boy. And he, ever calm, ever steady, pressed his nose to her cheek and let out the softest breath, as if he'd been holding it all this time. Ari. Outside, the steps of the courthouse had become a stage. Microphones were being thrust into hands, flashes popped like distant fireworks, and someone in a Channel 9 jacket shouted over the noise, Is this the first ruling of its kind? Officer Brooks adjusted his tie, looking deeply uncomfortable in front of the swarm. We're calling it a structured co-living agreement. Axel remains an active duty K-9, but when he's off duty, he's family. A woman reporter leaned in. So, he's both? Brooks glanced at Lena, now perched on the edge of a concrete bench, holding a small, laminated photo of herself and Max from years ago. In the picture, she was missing a tooth. Max had one ear flopped sideways. Both were grinning. He's always been both, Brooks answered. Grace stepped forward next, her voice quieter but just as clear. We're not rewriting policy. We're just reminding people it can bend when hearts are involved. The quote would go viral by sunset. The crowd began to disperse as the press conference wrapped. But not before several children walked up shyly to pet Axelson with tears, some with soft giggles. He let each one touch him. Not once did he flinch. One boy, no older than 5, whispered to Lena. He saved you, huh? She nodded, clutching Axel's leash. Yeah, but I think I saved him too. That night, a formal agreement was signed and sealed. It read more like a love letter than a contract. Axel would remain on the roster of active K-9S, his shifts coordinated to ensure off-duty days aligned with weekends and school holidays. Officer Brooks would manage logistics and training upkeep. Grace would oversee home care, including regular checkups, rest, and personal time with Lena. And Lena? Her role wasn't written in ink. It didn't need to be. She was the reason the agreement existed at all. At the bottom of the final page, the last Lenny added in handwriting simply read, "He is not owned. He is remembered." Later that evening, as the courthouse emptied and the lights flickered off one by one, the bronze statue of a K-9 officer at the west entrance caught the fading light. For years, it had stood as a silent tribute to duty and sacrifice. But today, the air around it felt different, softer. A child had left something at its feet, a chewed-up tennis ball, weathered by time and teeth. Tied to it was a note, to the dog who came home twice. The front door creaked open with a hesitation that felt almost sacred. Lena stood just inside the threshold, one hand clutching the doorknob, the other gently gripping Axel's leash. The late afternoon sun spilled across the porch in fractured light, catching dust motes that danced like memories made visible. Axel didn't rush in. He stood beside her, sniffing the air with that precise stillness only dogs possess. Ears perked, nostrils flaring gently. The scent of wood polish, laundry soap, faint traces of vanilla from the candle Grace had lit that morning cataloged it all, piece by piece. Then, slowly, like someone recalling a lullaby in the dark, he stepped forward. His claws tapped softly on the hardwood floor. He moved cautiously at first, one room at a time, head low, tail still not fearful, just reverent. Like the walls remembered him. And he was trying to listen. Lena didn't speak. She just followed. He padded past the hallway mirror, pausing briefly as if recognizing something not quite visible. Then into the kitchen, sniffed the baseboards, looked up at the fridge, sat for a moment by the back door where sunlight pooled into a warm square, and then he turned toward the living room. It was there, near the old stone fireplace, that something shifted. Axel walked forward, nose twitching, body relaxing. And then he saw it. Folded neatly beside the firewood rack, an old navy blue blanket, frayed at the edges, chewed corners dulled into soft fuzz from years ago. Lena crouched beside it, her voice barely above a breath. This was your favorite spot, remember? Axel didn't need prompting. He lowered himself onto the blanket slowly, turned once, then twice, just like he used to as a pupil curled into a crescent of quiet trust. His head rested on his front paws, eyes closing not out of fatigue, but peace. Lena's lip quivered as she watched him. 100 moments rushed through her, Max as a puppy, tumbling clumsily across that very rug. Max with his paw on her knee during nights she couldn't sleep. Max barking at the thunder like he could chase it away for her. And now here, he was older, trained, tempered by years apart, but still him. Still Hersch. She reached out, pulling the blanket a little closer around him. You used to drag this across the whole house, she whispered. Mom said it was like you were building a nest. Axel opened one eye and gave a soft grunt, like the memory agreed. Grace appeared at the doorway, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. She didn't interrupt the moment, just placed 1 cup on the coffee table and sat beside her daughter. He remembers, she said softly. Or maybe he never really forgot. Lena leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I was so afraid it was just wishful thinking. That maybe I just wanted it so badly. I made it up in my head. Grace didn't answer right away. She just watched the firelight flicker across Axel's fur. The room smelled like cinnamon and old hope. Sometimes, she finally said, the heart knows before the head does, and it waits. Axel stirred, his tail tapping the floor twice, a gentle rhythm as if to say, I waited too. Later that evening, Lena took him upstairs. Each step creaked like it always had. But tonight, it sounded like home. She opened the door to her bedroom. Not much had changed, posters had grown up a little. The bed had new sheets, but near the footboard sat a small, dented tin box. Lena opened it carefully and pulled out a rubber chew toy shaped like a star. Worn, tooth-marked, but whole. She held it out to him. Do you remember this? Axel sniffed it, then gently took it into his mouth not to chew, just to hold. Lena let out a breath that turned into laughter, broken at the edges. Still your favorite, huh? He wagged his tail. Once. She sat beside him on the rug, her voice quieter now. I know you still have work to do. I won't keep you from that. But on the days you don't, can we pretend? Like it was before? Axel shifted closer, resting his head in her lap, the toy still between his teeth. His body was heavier now. Stronger, but in that moment, he felt like the same pup who once fell asleep in her arms after a thunderstorm. Tears slipped down her cheeksalent, grateful. Welcome home, Max, she whispered. And in the quiet, the only sound was the soft thump of a tail against the floor, like a heartbeat returning after too long away. The morning light filtered softly through the sheer kitchen curtains, catching the quiet dust of yesterday's joy. The house was still, but not silent. Axel's gentle breaths rose and fell in rhythm with the ticking of the old wall clock. Lena lay curled beside him on the rug, her head resting lightly on his back, one hand buried in the fur behind his neck as if afraid that letting go would make him vanish again. But time does not pause, for miracles not even the fragile ones we dare to believe in. A car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching over gravel in a rhythm too official to be mistaken. The low hum of a Crown Vic engine. A police door opened, closed, heavy footsteps up the porch. Grace stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. It's Officer Brooks, she said quietly. Lena stirred. Axel sat up before she did, ears perked, tail brushing the floor once before going still. He looked toward the door, then back at her. A soft, conflicted whine escaped him. He knew. Lena rose to her knees and cupped his face gently. You came back, she whispered. And now you have to go again. She pressed her forehead to his. But I'm not losing you this time. Axel licked her cheek, just ons deliberate, slow, almost apologetic. The knock on the door was soft, respectful. Grace opened it to find Officer Brooks standing there, hat in hand. He looked rested but serious, as though the weight of what he had to do still settled somewhere in his chest. Morning, he offered. Come in, Grace replied, stepping aside. Brooks crouched as Axel approached. There was no command, no leash, just a silent understanding. Axel sat before him, tail sweeping, once in acknowledgement. You ready, partner? Brooks asked, voice lower than usual. Axel looked back at Lena. Hesitation flickered in his body. A pause, almost like protest. Lena stepped forward, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. She didn't say much, just, come back soon. The words were soft, but they clung to the air like frost on glass. Axel nuzzled into her shoulder, then pulled back gently. Duty stirred in him, as it always had, but this time, it carried the weight of something more than obedience, something like sacrifice. He walked to the door, paused once more, and then stepped outside. Brooks placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. He'll be back, I promise you. She nodded, though her eyes shimmered. I know, he's just both of ours now. The door closed behind them. From the window, Lena watched as Axel climbed into the cruiser. He didn't look back, but his ears stayed tilted toward the house until the car disappeared down the street. At the station, things felt the same. And yet, Brooks couldn't help noticing the change. Axel responded to commands with precision, but there was a softness to his gaze now, like a thread connecting him to something more than the job. like a part of his heart hadn't quite followed him back to uniform. During the morning briefing, when the radios cracked to life and the officers prepped for patrol, Brooks saw it again, Axel sitting a little closer to him, but glancing at the door more often, almost expectant. One of the rookies, Officer Keller, chuckled. "He missing someone already?" Brooks managed a half-smile. "He's adjusting." Keller gave a low whistle. "Never seen a dual-role K9 before. Must be hard, straddling two worlds." "Okay." Brooks looked down at Axel, who stared up at him with those storm-gray eyes, loyal, focused, but layered now with something that didn't fit into standard training. "He's not straddling," Brooks said after a moment. "He's bridging them, as it'll lay." That night, back at home, Lena placed Axel's toy star in the middle of her bed, not because she thought he'd come back today, but because she wanted the room to remember him. She fell asleep with the blanket folded neatly beside her, and the faintest scent of cedar still clinging to it like a whisper that hadn't fully left. The backyard hadn't seen this much life in years. Blankets were spread across the grass, weighted down by homemade sandwiches, lemonade pitchers, and sun-warmed bowls of fruit. A battered speaker played oldies low enough to hear the birds between tracks. Balloon simple, yellow and white bobbed in the summer breeze, tied to fence posts like quiet exclamation marks of joy. Axel was the center of it all. The moment Brooks had pulled up to the curb that Saturday morning, Lena had bolted out the front door barefoot, forgetting her shoes, forgetting the world. Axel had already begun to whine before the engine stopped. He leapt from the back seat not like a soldier returning to base, but like a boy finally let out for recess. Their reunion needed no words. It was just arms and fur, laughter and breathlessness, tangled together in the driveway under a sky that finally felt merciful. Now, a few hours later, Axel dashed through the backyard with a half-mangled tennis ball in his mouth, tail-carving joy through the air. "Go, Axel, go!" shouted Lena, hurling another ball across the lawn. He skidded, pivoted, and sprinted after it, with the unfiltered glee of a dog who remembered deep in his bones what it felt like to simply belong. Neighbors trickled in, curious but respectful, bringing folding chairs and potato salad, half under the pretense of a block party, half to witness something they hadn't known they needed to see. A dog once lost, now found. A family once fractured, now rethreading itself, one laugh at a time. Grace stood on the porch, arms crossed, smile soft. Her eyes followed every movement, but especially Axel's show. He looped past Lena again and again like orbit to her gravity. He paused only to nuzzle her side or press his head briefly into her lap before dashing off again into the green. "I remember when he was the size of a pillow," Grace whispered, barely audible. Next to her stood Officer Brooks, still in plain clothes but with his badge clipped to his belt. And now, he's both a hero and a pillow again. Grace chuckled, her eyes damp. "You ever think you'd be sharing custody with a 12-year-old? Brooks shrugged. "Not exactly standard procedure." Then, more seriously, "But I've never seen anything quite like this either." He glanced toward Lena. She was on the ground, hair tousled, laughing as Axel licked jelly from her cheek with determined precision. The world around them blurred just a girl and her dog, in that sacred rhythm only time and heartbreak can compose. "Truth is," Brooks said, voice lower now, "I think he's happier when he's with her, even if he loves the job." Grace nodded. "That's why we're doing this." They watched a while longer in silence. Axel returned with the ball once more, but instead of dropping it, he trotted straight to Grace this time. Saturday in front of her, tail sweeping the porch wood, dropped the ball with a soft thud at her feet. Grace knelt. "You remember me too, huh?" she said, stroking behind his ears. Axel leaned into her hand, eyes half closed. His body softened, his guard dropped. He didn't need to scan the fence line or listen for dispatch. For this moment, he was just home. She whispered, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, "We're whole again." End of crime. That evening, the sun bled slow and golden across the yard, dipping behind the trees with the kind of grace that felt earned. The balloons danced shadows across the lawn, long and playful. Someone lit a few string lights near the back fence, warm and forgiving. Lena curled up next to Axel on the picnic blanket, his body curled protectively beside hers, the tip of his tail twitching with dreams already beginning. She pressed her face to his shoulder, not to cry, but to breathe him in. Cedar. sunshine, something that smelled like safety. Grace brought out an old photo album and flipped to a page they hadn't dared look at for years. There, taped beside drawings with crayon fur and crooked paws, was a photo of a puppy sprawled in the same backyard, sleeping on a blanket that now rested beneath them. Brooks looked over her shoulder. "Looks like he always knew where he belonged," he murmured. Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. The lights flickered gently overhead. The world exhaled. And in that hush between laughter and memory, under the softness of string lights and stars not yet risen, a family began again. The sun was barely up when Officer Brooks adjusted his vest, clipped his radio, and gave a quick pat to the flank of his partner. "Let's do this, boy." Axel's ears perked. His tail gave a single, silent sweep. There was a certain sharpness in his eyes today, a calm focus beneath the amber glow of morning that Brooks had come to recognize. Something was already stirring in the dog's mind, a current he could sense before humans ever would. It was supposed to be routine. A follow-up check on an abandoned warehouse reported by a local resident for suspicious activity. The kind of stop that usually turned up beer cans, graffiti, or empty promises. But Axel had already begun sniffing the air before they crossed the threshold. The building groaned under the weight of disused sunlight, streaming in broken slats, casting sharp angles of light and shadow. Dust hung like fog. Still, Axel didn't hesitate. Nose down, body taut like a drawn bowstring, he led Brooks past the shattered remains of a forklift and toward the northeast wall. "Talk to me," Brooks whispered. Axel stopped suddenly. His body froze mid-step, then shifted slightly to the left. Nose down again. He pawed once at the concrete, then sat. A firm, deliberate alert. Brooks' pulse ticked faster. "You sure?" Axel didn't move. Brooks pulled out his flashlight and leaned down. The floor didn't look unusual, but the smell was beyond human senses. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I've got a possible 10 to 32 at 43rd and Baldwin. Requesting backup and bomb squad for verification." A moment passed. Then the building bloomed with the sound of sirens drawing closer. 2 hours later, the warehouse was surrounded by flashing lights and yellow tape. Reporters hovered near the perimeter, their eyes catching every whispered command, every guarded nod. Brooks stood off to the side, arms folded, while Axel sat by his heel, gaze steady, unmoved by the commotion. The discovery had been far more than anyone expected. Beneath a false concrete slab was a concealed steel hatch, and within it, a cache of military-grade weapons, smuggled silencers, ammunition boxes marked in Cyrillic, and detailed maps of surrounding police precincts. It wasn't a storage stash. It was a plan. And Axel had found it before anyone else could. Chief Reynolds approached, jaw set but eyes stunned. "Your partner just prevented a potential massacre." Brooks glanced down. He always knows. The chief dropped to a knee in front of Axel. "You're not just a good boy, you're a damn guardian." Axel blinked slowly, his head tilting as if to acknowledge the words. Brooks scratched behind his ear. "What now?" he asked. Reynolds stood. "We give him what he deserves." Huh. That evening, the city's local news station led with the headline, "K9, Axel uncovers arsenal, thwarts possible police attack." Footage showed a still of Axel sitting alert near the hatch, Officer Brooks at his side. Within hours, the photo had gone viral, reposted by veterans groups, animal advocacy pages, and law enforcement networks nationwide. Tweets flooded in from as far as London and New York, calling him the dog with 2 families, 1 mission. But at that moment, Axel wasn't watching television. He was curled in the back of the cruiser, head resting on Brooks' jacket, breathing slow and even. Brooks slid into the driver's seat and looked back at him. "You saved lives today, buddy." Axel's eyes opened for a moment, then closed again. Outside, the world was spinning faster than either of them liked. Media vans were circling like hawks. Even the mayor had called to request a formal commendation. But in the silence of the patrol car, none of it mattered. Because somewhere in the center of it all, beyond the camera flashes and flashing lights, was the unspoken truth. Axel had followed instinct, loyalty, that invisible tether that connected him to duty not because he was trained to obey, but because he understood what was at stake. He wasn't just a K9 unit, and he wasn't just a girl's long-lost dog. He was both. He belonged to 2 worlds now, And in each one, he was irreplaceable. The morning after the warehouse bust, the town of Fairview woke to a different kind of alarmity, not triggered by sirens or barking, but by headlines. The courtroom, dog saves lives. From lost pup to hero cop. Axel, the 9 who came home, then went to war. The local paper's front page carried a now famous image. Axel, sitting alert beside the open hatch of confiscated weapons, a thin beam of light casting a halo around him. Just behind him, slightly blurred, stood Officer Brooks, his hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder. 2 silhouettes, 1 moment. The kind of photo that told more truth than any caption ever could. The story spread fast, faster than even the courtroom headlines weeks before. Because this wasn't just about a girl and her dog anymore. This was about a dog who had made it back, and then made it matter. Grace turned down the radio as Lena stood by the kitchen window, watching the wind rustle the backyard trees. The girl was quiet that morning, her cereal untouched, her eyes softer than usual. Not sad, just elsewhere. "Sweetheart," Grace said gently. "They're saying such kind things about him. He deserves it." Lena nodded. "I know." She didn't turn from the window. "But I wish they'd stop saying hero like it means he has to keep proving it." Grace paused. It was the kind of sentence only a child could speak with such clarity, and the kind that only a mother could fully understand. Because beneath Lena's pride was something older than her years, a quiet dread that the world might take Axel again. Not because of loss, but because of duty. She crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter. "Axel isn't going anywhere without coming back to you, baby. You know that." Lena looked down. "That's what you said last time." Meanwhile, across town, at the Fairview Police Department, phones were ringing off the hook. Requests from national outlets, emails from law enforcement agencies, even a call from a morning show producer wanting to feature the miracle dog and his girl on a live segment. Brooks scrolled through messages on his desk tablet and sighed. "I leave this guy alone for 5 minutes, he muttered, glancing at Axel asleep in the corner of his office, curled into a tight crescent, tail over nose, as if the whole world weren't buzzing about him. Reynolds popped his head in. "CNN wants a quote. Animal Planet just offered a short documentary feature." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? They even want to recreate the courtroom moment. With the girl. And the DNA expert? You in?" Brooks gave him a look. "Do I look like I want to be famous?" "No," Reynolds smirked. "But your partner already is." They both glanced at the dog. "He never asked for any of this," Brooks said quietly. Reynolds nodded. "But he earned every word." That evening, Lena sat cross-legged on her bed, the glow of her tablet lighting her face. Axel's story had made its way onto nearly every platform. Photos, videos, even fan art. Someone had drawn a cartoon of him with a gold badge around his neck, flanked by a little girl with curly hair and a big, toothy grin. Except the cartoon smile wasn't quite right. It didn't show the way Lena's real smile always tilted more to the left. It didn't capture the faint scar on Axel's ear. It didn't understand that the bond between them was never about spectacle. It was built in silence, in waiting, in that first moment on the courtroom floor when he laid his head in her lap without hesitation. Lena closed the tablet and slid it under her pillow. She reached over and pulled Axel's old blanket to her chest, the chewed corner still frayed, the scent faint but familiar. Downstairs, Grace stood by the door as Brooks dropped Axel off for the night. "She's a little quiet today," she told him. Brooks nodded, watching as Axel trotted into the house without even looking back at him. "She's proud," Grace added. "But she's also scared." Brooks sighed. "So am I." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 grown-ups bearing the weight of a child's heart, and a dog caught in the gravity of both their worlds. "He's not just a canine anymore," Grace said quietly. "He's family." Brooks looked down. "Yeah. And somehow, he's also everyone's hero now." Grace smiled gently. "Then let's make sure we don't let the world forget he's still just one dog. One that needs to come home." That night, as Axel lay curled at Lena's feet, she reached down and ran her fingers through his fur. "Don't let them change you," she whispered. Axel didn't move, but his tail gave the softest thump against the mattress twice, like a promise sealed in silence. Outside, the world spun with noise. But in that room, All was still. And for one more night, hero or not, he was home. The first snow had melted into soft puddles along the schoolyard curb when Officer Brooks pulled up, Axel sitting proudly in the back seat. A few kids playing near the entrance gasped when they saw the sleek German Shepherd leap down, vest gleaming, ears high. Word spread faster than a lunchroom rumor. "The courtroom dog is here." Inside, Miss Holloway's classroom buzzed with an energy no spelling test could contain. Crayons were abandoned, math worksheets forgotten. All eyes turned to the door the moment Lena stepped in, walking slightly ahead of Brooks, her hand resting gently on Axel's back. There was a hush, not of fear, of reverence. For a moment, even the chatterboxes fell silent. Axel paused, surveying the room like he had a mission to complete. And maybe, in some quiet way, he did. Brooks gave a soft signal. "Go on, boy." With practiced ease, Axel trotted to the front, turned on a dime, and sat perfect posture, eyes alert. Someone gasped when he offered a paw. Another kid clapped when he rolled over. But it wasn't the tricks that held them. It was the presence. The unshakable calm of a dog who had once been lost stand came back. When Lena took her place beside him, her voice didn't shake. She didn't hide behind her curls. She simply spoke. "This is Axel. He used to be mine. Then he became a police dog. Then, somehow both." She paused. "People called him a hero because he helped find bad guys. But I think he's a hero because he remembered me, even when I didn't know where to find him." The room was still. Even Miss Holloway's hand, normally twitching toward her attendance list or whiteboard marker, was still. Lena crouched beside Axel, stroking his fur. "When I was little, I used to read to him at night. Even when he fell asleep, I kept reading, because I believed he could still hear me." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a dog-eared copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. The cover was creased, the corners worn, but she held it like something sacred. "I read this to him back then," she said. "I thought maybe today we could read it together again." She opened the book. Her voice was soft but steady. Axel didn't move, but he leaned in, settled his head in her lap, listened. And the class, fidgety and full of fourth-grade energy just moments ago, sat still as stones. Lena read aloud the part about how things become real not by how they're made, but by being loved, and sometimes worn and scarred. A few of the children looked down at their shoes. A few blinked quickly, and Miss Holloway, standing by the windowsill, dabbed the corner of her eye with her sleeve. When Lena finished, a hand shot up. "Did Axel really remember you?" the boy asked. Lena looked down at the dog, his eyes closed now, one paw twitching in what looked suspiciously like a dream of chasing tennis balls. "Yes," she said. "Even before the DNA test. He didn't need science to know who I was." After story time, Axel lay in a sunbeam by the window while the students took turns drawing him with stubby crayons. Some added superhero capes. One gave him wings. Another drew a badge in the shape of a heart. During lunch, a shy girl in the back of the room slipped Lena a folded note. "Thank you. I lost my dog last year. I think he would have liked Axel. Maybe I'll write a story about him now." Lena smiled. A quiet smile. The kind that didn't need to be loud to be felt. Brooks watched from the back of the room, arms crossed, a strange tightness in his throat. He had brought Axel in for community outreach. But what happened in that room wasn't outreach. It was healing. When it was time to leave, the whole class followed them to the front entrance, waving and cheering as Axel hopped back into the cruiser. Lena turned just before getting in and looked at the building, her school, her world, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel small inside it. She felt real, just like the story said. And somewhere deep down, she knew Axel felt the same. The sun filtered gently through the maple trees in the town square, casting a warm glow on the small wooden stage that had been draped in navy and gold. Folding chairs lined the grass in neat rows. Some bore city officials. Others were filled with children who had drawn posters of a certain German shepherd wearing a badge. On the edge of it all stood a young girl in a pale blue dress, gripping a single white flower. "Lena." The podium squeaked as Officer Brooks stepped up, a printed speech in his hand, but it was Axel who drew the crowd's eyes. Sitting beside him in full uniform vest, his ears perked and stance regal, Axel looked more than a dog. He looked like a symbol, a survivor, a hero, a bridge between duty and love. Brooks cleared his throat. "When I first partnered with Axel," he began. He didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He just worked. With precision. With loyalty. I had no idea what he had lost or who had lost him. A murmur ran through the crowd. Grace stood behind Lena, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Brooks continued, voice steady. "Today, we're not just honoring a K-9 officer who uncovered an illegal weapons ring. We're honoring a journey, a bond, a second chance for both of them." He turned to Axel. "You didn't just serve this town. You reminded us that even in service, there is heart." "Ooh." A uniformed official stepped forward carrying a velvet-lined box. Inside lay a custom-forged metal etched with a paw print on one side and the words, "For Valor and Heart" on the other. Brooks knelt, clipped the metal gently to Axel's vest. The crowd applauded, not wildly, but deeply. Lena stepped forward. In her hand, the white flower picked from her backyard that morning. Not grand, not expensive, just familiar. She bent down, slowly, carefully, and tucked it beneath Axel's vest strap, just over his heart. "I saved it for you," she whispered. Axel looked up at her, tail brushing lightly against her shoes. In the silence, the moment hung suspended. For a girl who once whispered stories into his fur, and a dog who never forgot the sound of her voice, this wasn't a ceremony. It was a homecoming. Afterward, townspeople lingered to pet Axel, take photos, and share stories they'd read online. One elderly man with a cane leaned in and said softly, "We've needed something good like this around here. Thank you." Lena didn't say much. She didn't need to. Axel never left her side. And when the wind picked up and carried the sound of the national anthem across the square, Lena looked up at the flag, then down at the dog who had once been lost to her. He wore a medal now. But she already knew. He'd always been a hero. Even before the ceremony, the sun melted into the horizon like honey poured over old wood, bathing the porch in gold. The boards creaked softly beneath the weight of stillness of memory. Lena sat cross-legged on the wicker bench, her fingers trailing along the edge of the faded blanket tucked around Axel's front paws. The same blanket he used to chew on as a pup. Axel rested beside her, his body half-curled, eyes heavy with that kind of tired only peace can bring. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with the cicadas humming in the distance. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't scanning, wasn't on duty, he was just home. Grace stepped outside quietly, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She didn't speak at first, just looked at them, silhouetted against the deepening sky. Then she settled onto the step beside them. Her shoulders finally relaxed, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Lena leaned into Axel's side, her cheek pressing against the curve of his shoulder. He didn't move, only let out a soft huff through his nose, the way dogs do when they're completely content. "You remember this place?" Lena asked gently. Axel's ears twitched. She smiled to herself. "I used to sit right here and make up bedtime stories. You'd fall asleep before I finished the second sentence." Grace chuckled. "So did I, sometimes." Lena looked at her mother, then back at Axel. Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was afraid speaking it too loud might break the moment. "You came back when I needed you most." The wind picked up just enough to rustle the trees, carrying with it the scent of jasmine from the garden. Axel shifted slightly and leaned in closer, his head resting right in Lena's lap. He hadn't forgotten. Not the scent of the porch, not the timbre of her voice, not the ache of separation that only loyalty could endure. He was here now, and that was enough. Grace reached out and gently stroked his ear. "You've grown up together," she murmured. "Both of you, but in different ways." Lena nodded, still watching the horizon, eyes misty but steady. I think I used to wait for this moment in my dreams, but now that it's real, it doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like coming full circle," Grace said. Axel stirred, lifting his head as if understanding the phrase. He looked between them two pieces of a life that had been shattered, now somehow stitched back together by time, patience, and something far stronger than luck. Love. The kind that waits at courtroom steps. The kind that fights for truth with trembling hands. The kind that never forgets the sound of home. Lena leaned down and kissed Axel between the eyes. "No matter what uniform you wear," she whispered, You'll always be my dog first. M. The twilight deepened, and the stars began to prick through the fading blue. Grace stood to light the porch lantern, but paused to take one more look at them, her daughter, curled against a dog who had once been a shadow in the city, and now was family again. Axel closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, everything was still. Everything was whole. The library smelled faintly of old pages and lavender cleaner. Afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting golden stripes across the desk where Lena sat, pencil in hand. Her journal was open, a soft pink hardcover with stickers along the spinion of a paw print, one of a gavel, and one of a heart. She tapped her pencil twice against the page, then began to write in neat, careful script. They told me sometimes dogs get lost forever, but I learned something different. I learned that love doesn't always come back the way you expect, but it does come back. Sometimes wearing a badge. Outside, laughter drifted in from the front lawn. A group of children knelt in the grass, gently petting a senior beagle with cloudy eyes. Beside them, Grace handed out homemade pamphlets printed with bold letters. Every paw counts. Adopt. Reunite. Protect. Nah. Axel sat patiently near the edge of the circle, vest off, tail sweeping the ground as he accepted scratches and belly rubs like a seasoned pro. His gaze remained steady, protective, but softer than it had once been. This was no longer the Axel who slept in kennel corners or moved only on command. This was a dog with 2 homes, 2 roles, and 1 heart. And he had learned to share it. Lena glanced up from her journal to watch a boy place a friendship bracelet around Axel's paw. "He's a hero," the boy whispered. "He's family," Lena said gently, offering a smile. The event had grown over the past weeks. What started as a small community idea had become a local movement. Lena, once the girl who found her dog in court, was now being called something else. Youth Ambassador for Animal Welfare. She didn't quite know what that meant at first. But now, standing behind a table of brochures and adoption forms, she understood. It meant standing up for those who can't speak. It meant hope, not just for dogs, but for the people waiting for them. It meant second chances. That morning, she and Grace had visited a nearby shelter where they donated blankets, treats, and Axel's old toys. Lena had walked slowly past each kennel, her heart both heavy and full. One pupa golden retriever with eyes too old for his age had licked her fingers through the bars. She'd crouched beside him and whispered, "Don't give up. Someone's looking for you. Or maybe you're looking for them." Now, she looked back down at her journal and continued writing. Not every story ends in courtrooms or medals. Some just end with being seen, being chosen, being loved again. A breeze lifted the pages and brushed strands of hair across her cheek. She tucked them behind her ear, took a deep breath, and added one final line. "Miracles do exist." She closed the journal slowly and held it to her chest. From the lawn, Grace called out, "Lena!" Someone brought peanut butter bones for Axel. Axel's head perked up. He turned toward Lena expectantly, tail thumping. She grinned and rose to her feet. "Coming!" As she jogged down the steps toward them, her laughter floated through the air like music. And behind her, resting on the library desk, was the journal still warm with the last touch of her hand. Its title shone in gold letters beneath the sunlight. "Miracles do exist. M." And this one had 4 legs, a badge, and a heart that never gave up. In a world often clouded by noise and hurry, stories like Axel's remind us of what truly matters: connection, loyalty, and second chances. At the heart of this journey is a German Shepherd, a symbol not just of strength and service, but of unwavering love. Axel wasn't just a canine officer. He was a bridge between trauma and healing, between a lost child and a renewed family. This story speaks to every person who has ever loved an animal and felt that silent, powerful bond. It reminds us that dogs, especially German Shepherds, with their intelligence and devotion, are more than companions. They are protectors, teachers, and sometimes the only ones who stay when the world falls apart. More importantly, it reminds us to see value where others might not, in a scarred animal, a quiet child, a broken past. From shared custody to shared purpose, Axel's story is a testament to hope and the good that can grow from compassion. May we all carry forward the lesson that love, when given the chance, can heal anything. And sometimes it arrives on four paws with a tail that never stops wagging.